Good morning, everybody. We're gonna get started. So if you're still grabbing your bagel or your coffee, you can finish doing that, and then come on in and have a seat. So we're gonna get rolling. My name is Rafael Sestero. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Community Preservation Corporation. That's my day job. But today I'm here as a proud board member of the Center for an Urban Future. And thank you all for being here today for what promises to be a great day, an event. In case you're new to us, the Center for Urban Future is a think tank that's focused on creating a stronger and more equitable economy in New York and expanding economic opportunity for all New Yorkers. One of the things that drew me to the CUF board and that I love about CUF is that it consistently raises the visibility and on issues and ideas that otherwise sort of float under the radar for government officials and civic leaders. And even better, their ideas spark new city policies and new investments, or to quote a recent headline in Crain's about CUF and on a cover story, the think tank that quietly is influencing New York's top officials. I'm excited about today's event, not just because of the incredible lineup of speakers we have, but because we're tackling one of the most critical issues facing New York today: how to address the affordability crisis that's causing way too many young families to leave our city. In recent years, few cities have suffered as large an exodus of young families as New York. Between April 2020 and July 2023, the population of children under the age of 5 in New York City declined by 18.3%. This was far more than the average 4.6% decline nationally, the 8.1% average decline in large urban counties, and more than peer cities such as San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Chicago. We know that affordability issues are at the heart of this, from skyrocketing housing costs to the lack of affordable childcare. Addressing these challenges and retaining more of New York's young families will be critical to keeping the city competitive in the decades ahead. It will also be key to creating a more equitable city and to sustaining and growing New York's middle class. Today's event is going to delve into all of these issues, and we'll focus on generating actionable ideas. Before we move on, I do want to extend a very big thank you to Winston Fisher and Fisher Brothers Foundation for making today's event possible, for collaborating with CUF in our recent report, and for their long-standing support of CUF's Middle Class Jobs Project. It's been an honor to partner with Winston on this important project for the last 9 years, and for all of us at CUF, we're proud of how we've managed to elevate so many important ideas about how to strengthen our city, grow the number of good jobs, and expand pathways to the middle class. Now, let's get started, and please join me in welcoming CUF's Executive Director, Jonathan Bowles. Jonathan.
Good morning. It's great to see all of you. Thanks, Raphael, and thanks to all of you joining on the live stream today as well. I also want to thank all my team at the Center for an Urban Future. They are amazing. I especially want to thank two people who worked so hard to plan this event, Stephanie Arivalo and Sophia Tumolo. So Stephanie and Sophia, thank you. Thanks to all the speakers that are participating today, and a very big thanks to Winston and everybody at Fisher Brothers. So this past year, my colleagues and I at CUF partnered with Winston on a series of 3 reports focused on concrete ideas for keeping New York competitive in the evolving post-pandemic economy. Because as well as the city is doing today, there are accelerating challenges and new competition for the city, and there are untapped opportunities for New York. Our first report put forward 5 ideas to help New York thrive in the post-pandemic economy. Among other things, we recommended the city create or attract a new top-flight undergraduate university, and that the city establish a new 5-borough cultural festival. The second report we did advanced 5 ideas to maximize New York's opportunity with AI, with proposals to help ensure that New York captures a large share of the expected growth in well-paying jobs in this field. And most recently, we put forward 5 ideas to ensure New York does a better job retaining young families, addressing the affordability challenges that are arguably the biggest threat to the city's economic growth. We're going to get into these and other ideas today in what I think is a unique and exciting agenda. So just to kind of like explain what we're all going to do, we're going to start off with a fireside chat with Andrew Kimball, the president of EDC. Great to have Andrew here. We'll hear 3-minute idea pitches on how the city can retain young families from several candidates that are running for mayor. We also have a couple of amazing panel discussions. And throughout the morning, CUF staff will be coming up and delivering short pitches about the 5 ideas from our recent report on retaining families. And in our last half hour, we'll be asking all of you, our audience, to share your own ideas for retaining families. Now, to get things started, I'm going to ask Andrew to come up here. And I'm just incredibly excited to introduce someone that I admire a whole lot. In fact, yeah, the middle would be great. Long before he was president of NYC EDC, it was clear he was already one of the city's smartest and most innovative thinkers about New York's economy. And in his time running EDC, he's not only helped the city reach an all-time high for jobs, but has crucially prioritized areas that EDC hadn't always focused on before, including projects involving CUNY, underserved entrepreneurs, the green economy, and blue highways. I'm looking forward to getting into it with him, and so please join me in thanking or acknowledging Andrew Kimball. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here.
It is great to be here.
So, you know, I mentioned or I alluded to, like, we've known each other for a long time now. You've been focused on the city's economy at the Navy Yard, at Industry City, at EDC, and many other ways over the years. And I guess before we get into this, you know, we've been doing this work around strengthening our economy in the post-pandemic era. And I thought it'd be helpful to start with, you know, given from where you've been kind of looking at in the most recent years at EDC, before that at the Navy Yard and Industry City, what's been the city's special sauce for the remarkable growth? Because we're at a point where we've had 20 years plus of phenomenal, like 1 million new jobs in the city. What was the special sauce that helped us get here?
Let me just say that the special sauce in my career has been in part reading all those great CUF reports, going back to my Brooklyn Navy Yard days. Seriously, like phenomenal work, and it is a delight to be here with you. Your team is incredible, your board is amazing. And I have watched those reports and learned from them over the years. And, you know, I would say there are 2 fundamental pieces to the secret sauce about why New York is doing so well, why the fundamentals are so strong. And they're the symbiotic nature between diversifying our economy and bringing young people here. So our strongest strength is our talent. Our talent wants to be here because of the high quality of life, because of the diversity that young people want to be around, and because of the range of industries. The industries want to be here because the young people want to be here. So you guys just came out with an amazing report again on the explosive growth of tech in the broadest sense. Why are they coming here? It's because the talent is here. You know, why are colleges and universities from all over the world looking to have an outpost in New York? It's because the talent is here. And, you know, I do want to point out, and Raphael is absolutely right, you know, we had an exodus early on in COVID days. That has begun to turn around. So not only have we gained back the 1 million jobs we lost, we've added another 100 some odd thousand in jobs, a significant portion, very good paying jobs in tech and finance, healthcare. But we've also turned the corner on population. So that virtuous cycle where you need to be adding population, not just to make our city more vibrant, but to add tax revenue, is really important. And just over the last 2 years, we've added over 100,000 new New Yorkers, and that's not just migrant population. That continues to be young people. 500,000 young people, recent college and university graduates, have come here since 2021, and we have another 500,000 in schools in New York City, in college and academia. That's 1 million out of the 8.4 million people here. That is astonishing. They tend to stay here 10 years or more. That's the stickiness factor, and that will lead into a conversation about what keeps them after the 10 years, which is housing.
Well, let's get into that. I mean, I think like that, it's really helpful to hear how kind of talent really is important. And you know, it's like, you know, I think what you're saying and what I've certainly seen is, you know, we get, you know, like a top engineer from Stanford that comes here. You know, we get folks from Carnegie Mellon, from MIT, and because they're here, companies are here and they're creating loads of other jobs, right? They're not just creating jobs for that Stanford engineer, right? They're creating hundreds of jobs that end up employing people that grow up in New York too, right?
That's right. And you know, we've got to keep an eye on our homegrown talent always. We've got to be doubling down on smart investments with DOE and with CUNY to create career path, and I'm really proud of some of the work that EDC is doing there to make sure our homegrown talent is able to capitalize on these good paying jobs of the future, because yes, it is a problem that we are losing young people who may move here, and after 8-10 years they start to think about having a family. They see that, you know, the vacancy rates for apartments are less than 1%. It becomes really difficult, and they decide to leave. That's a terrible thing for New York. We've got to address that, and I will talk more about it, but we're also losing too many middle and working class Black and brown families, you know, from middle class neighborhoods in Brooklyn and Queens, who are just, you know, throwing in the towel because of cost. And we've got to do more there, and that also goes back to housing. I will say on the glass half full front, though, not only have we gained back those jobs, but we have been at record highs for workforce participation. So that's the percentage of people who have a job or who are looking for jobs. And you know, a lot of people checked out during COVID, and it took them a long time to get back in the game, and they are back in the game, and that is a positive sign. 1 in 8 businesses in New York City were created in the last 12 months. Those tend to be really, really small businesses, so not just tech or life sciences or green economy, those sectors that EDC is traditionally focused on, but mom and pops and neighborhood retail, and you know, people are working closer to where they're living, and so we're seeing some of these outer borough commercial hubs, you know, really growing, which is part of our whole post-COVID strategy of finding places everywhere where people live, work, learn, and play, including Midtown. The days of 100% office are over. We got to do it everywhere. We got to do it in East New York, in Broadway Junction, in Jamaica, Queens, and Morris Park in the Bronx, everywhere.
So let's get to what you were saying before about the 10 years, because obviously we're here today around retaining families. And I think what you were alluding to is something we kind of mentioned in our report that we did with Winston, that is like, you know, we do keep attracting young people to the city. In fact, you can look at like kind of the number of applicants this year for NYU. It's like off the charts, I think an all-time record. But like, you know, not everybody decides to stay once they're at that age in the 30s where they're considering a family. And we do still see data suggesting that people with young children are moving out. And so even though I think that it's gotten better from the worst of the pandemic, so I guess like, I'm curious, like you and others in the administration, what are you doing to try to attack those issues, which I think obviously affordability issues are at the heart of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really proud that EDC has sort of gotten back to its core mission in the last few years on job creation, and I can go on and on about that, but if you ask me what's the top challenge the city faces, number 1, 2, 3 are all housing. Maria Torres Springer, amazing public servant, first deputy mayor, gave a speech before Abney, I don't know, 8 months, 10 months ago, talked about how we needed to do everything, everywhere, all at once when it came to housing. And so, you know, what did that mean? That meant right out of the box with this administration, we came up with a roadmap with the governor called the New York Plan. It called for a series of interventions. It called for state legislation, for a new 421A program. It called for a new incentive for conversion of vacant office space to residential. At the local level, we put in place an accelerator program for conversions of office to residential. We called for the City of Yes zoning change, which now has passed, 3 different parts to that. The last housing, the most important zoning change in my lifetime by far. You know, our heads have been in the sand in New York about zoning, and we have rules and regulations that go back to the 1950s. It's nuts. That has begun to unlock enormous housing. And then you have, and while there is still pushback and sort of NIMBYism that you encounter sometimes in the city council, credit to the city council, rezonings, neighborhood rezonings are getting approved again at a fast pace, and this administration has shown they are not afraid to undertake massive efforts that have failed in the past, like Long Island City as a great example, or what we're doing at the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, not only create jobs, but housing. We need to be doing all of those things simultaneously. We need to be building housing of all kinds, absolutely, deeply affordable housing, workforce housing, but also market rate housing, because that relieves enormous pressure on the rest of the city in terms of gentrification spilling into every neighborhood. It is really important we do all of those things. And we are not the housing agency. HPD's been doing incredible work, HDC. That vertical of this administration, I would stand up to any administration in my lifetime. Economic development and housing and planning. It has been extraordinary what's happened.
This is the 4th year of this administration. We're not sure what's happening in the next 4 years, but I'm curious, what you would advise the next mayor to kind of, or all the folks in the city council. Are there projects that are either underway or afoot that you're like, hey, we got to make sure that happens because it's creating the housing that we need?
I think absolutely. While it took a year longer than we thought to have a breakthrough at the state legislative level with some of these new incentives, 485X has not worked particularly well so far. That's going to need to be tweaked. 421A was much more successful at driving, the private sector on private sector land to build affordable housing. We're not seeing that. What we've been doing, and this is by executive order from the mayor, is every public site in the city, we have got to push on housing. And so, what are some of those projects? 100 Gold, a building Raphael sat in, a massive, old, bureaucratic building with mold on the ceilings, and it's a mess, and HPD is in there. They deserve a better place. There's 6 other agencies. We can take that building down and build over 1,000 new units of housing. We have an RFP out for that. Gansevoort Street, next to the Whitney, next to the meat market, next to the High Line. We've cracked heads at the local level, formed partnerships to put an RFP out for that site. At the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, 122 acres of basically forgotten land for 50 years. Multiple mayors trying to get control of what was an uncontrollable tri-party agreement between the city, state, and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. We broke through that. We now have full control of the land. We put forward a very bold plan to create nearly 8,000 units of new housing, massive new storm surge resilience, and $1.5 billion new port focused on the blue highways. And one part of the plan that hasn't been talked about as much is 250,000 square feet of deeply subsidized light industrial space fitting into that incredible growth sector we tapped into at the Navy Yard, at Industry City, at Bush and Bat, the maker space where art meets tech and fashion. We need more low-cost space for that. That's another important part of keeping families here that maybe aren't in tech or those higher paying, but are in the creative sector. And by the way, those young people in tech partly want to be here because there's so many amazing creatives. And if we lose our artist base and creative base, that's another problem. So we need to create more space like that. So every piece of land we need to be focused on.
I agree. But let me ask you to make a case for BMT, because you do read some things where some folks are saying hey, we're going to lose precious kind of working waterfront or industrial waterfront. And I want to ask you, because I know you have been so genuinely supportive of kind of industrial space, jobs that aren't just the tech or finance jobs, right? At the Navy Yard, at Industry City. But you've looked at this and you say, hey, this is a site that should have some housing on it.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are some people of goodwill who believe, over my dead body shall there ever be anything but industrial on an industrial business zone. That is unfortunate and holding us back. I understand why some of it happened. Some of it happened because in the Bloomberg years, there was a lot of success bringing back to life the Brooklyn waterfront, and that meant large swaths of industrial space went away in Greenpoint and Williamsburg and was replaced by housing. Could there have been a better mix in there? Possibly, but it was a moment in time when we had an opportunity. There were very few industrial jobs. We needed housing. At the same time, you had places like the Navy Yard explode with success and create jobs. You had massive investments in the Brooklyn Army Terminal. We are trying to thread a needle on a site that has seen no investment, that is essentially falling into the river, where we can do both things. And by creating housing to meet a policy goal that we critically need, while also generating revenue that will cross-subsidize modernizing 60 acres of bulkheads and piers that are literally falling into the water, we believe is meritorious, especially since what we're going to do there is focused on getting trucks off of our roads by bringing more goods by water east of the Hudson into Brooklyn, particularly food that can transload onto barges, when today all of the food either comes by truck up I-95 and goes to the Bronx to get processed, or comes by ship to New Jersey, goes in cold storage, gets on a truck, goes up to the Bronx. 12,000 trucks a day coming over our bridges. We can do better by having a blue highway, and the Brooklyn Marine Terminal can be a core node on that blue highway.
Great. Yes, but one other thing you mentioned, that you're not the housing agency. And I'm curious, I want to ask about that because, we just published this report on the tech sector this week. And it's striking how many of the tech founders and CEOs that we interviewed, that when you ask them, what do you need from city government? They're not saying tax breaks for the most part. In fact, most of them told us, we don't need tax breaks, we don't want tax breaks. What we need people to be able to get around, like good transit around the city. We need housing so that people can live here and want to keep coming here. We need good parks, and we need culture. And it strikes me that this is the kind of fastest growing industry, and kind of none of the things they're kind of asking about from kind of an economic growth perspective are really kind of in the purview of EDC. I mean, or maybe I'm wrong about that, but just how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, EDC has quietly built a massive construction management operation, and I really started in Bloomberg, where key capital projects went to us in part because we're not a government agency and we can get them done faster. So we're doing about $9 billion a year of capital projects, and many of those public realm improvements you were just referencing, EDC is doing. So we are doing bike lanes everywhere in New York City. The East Midtown Greenway that actually goes out into the water off of the FDR, EDC built. We're in charge of completing the loop around Manhattan. We're working on 70 miles of other greenways throughout the city in close partnership with DOT and Parks, but we are doing a lot of that. You look at a project like Willets Point. I know you and I were just talking about the book Abundance, and how challenging it is to get stuff done, big projects done nationally. So you get off the 7 train at Willets Point, you look out, you see the answer. Right? That is a project that took, multiple mayors. Bloomberg played a key role in starting to acquire some of the chop shops that had been there for 50 years, sitting on top of 100 years of coal ash heap that Robert Moses dumped there. Then de Blasio took a big swing and announced about 1,100 units of housing there. We came in and saw an opportunity to double down on all of that. And, these are all choices that you make as mayor. Where are your resources going to go? Close partnership with HPD there. We upsized the housing amount to 2,500 units, the largest 100% affordable housing project in 40 years. And we also thought, let's bring more jobs here, build on the sports cluster. We made a deal with NYCFC for the first privately financed all-electric stadium, everything built out of the floodplain. If you get off of the 7 line now, you will see the first of that housing getting topped off. You will see roads raised up 15 to 20 feet, new bike lanes. You will see the stadium coming out of the ground. We need that times 100 in New York. Every borough needs examples like Willits, but it's expensive. And here's where the federal government needs to play a role. We need more access to tax-exempt financing. I mean, Raphael and others have spent their whole careers like focusing on moving the needle here. This is a massive problem, the backlog of affordable housing projects that can't be moved forward because there's not access to tax-exempt bonds that flow through the state down to the city is insane. And every blue state and red state likes tax-exempt financing. Why can't we get that done in Congress? Like, this is a perfect place that this Congress and maybe this administration could make a difference for urban areas across the country.
I love the recommendation. You know, you mentioned abundance, and I wanted to ask one more thing about, you know, like, you just did City of Yes, and big accomplishment. Congratulations for the administration getting that done. But, you know, when I think about that, it's like, yes, it's a major deal for housing in New York City, right? But also, I love the approach in that part of City of Yes, including the kind of City of Yes for economic opportunity, was about kind of getting rid of these kind of inane, unnecessary ordinances or regulations or zoning that maybe have been on the books for 30, 40, or 50 years, but like really were only kind of prohibitive right now, that don't make any more sense in today's economy. So for instance, like a small business that's just not allowed to operate on a retail strip for some kind of use case scenario that no longer really makes sense, or, you know, another business not being able to be in an office building because of the kind of type of work it does. But what's next in that kind of City of Yes type of approach, right? Do you see, as you do kind of your job at EDC, other parts of economic development where, you know, things slow down, it's difficult to work with the city? For instance, on this tech report, people in the deep tech sector said it's just very difficult working with city government on things. Are there things that you'd love to see, maybe the next mayor, maybe this mayor if there's another 4 years, but just like, what's next on that kind of agenda?
Yeah, it is difficult working with city government. That's why everybody comes to EDC, because we're not city government. But there is certainly room for improvement, and there's so many amazing public servants in the city who are fighting every day to move projects forward and get things done. I think the City of Yes, as you noted, was a major step forward. Just to build on your examples, you know, on small main streets where, you know, you have a bake shop, you can't really have a commissary and little factory connected to it because in the 1950s they didn't want manufacturing right next to housing. Through City of Yes, you can have that. And by the way, you could also build 5 or 6 stories mid-block of housing above it. So, you know, we have all of these urban, suburban neighborhoods around the city that haven't been touched. They are going to be touched, but when you look at it topographically, what the City of Yes will do, the first time I saw this, and Dan Grodnick and the team at DCB did such an amazing job selling it, but you look at it and it's so frickin' reasonable. It's not like high-rises popping up on every street. It's 5, 6, 7, 8-story buildings mid-block in commercial hubs where you today maybe have 1 or 2 stories of retail. I think, you know, I saw at the Navy Yard in particular, you could have this kind of maker retail at the base of buildings with, you know, commercial and light industrial above. There's no reason you can't do that with residential above. That's what we're going to try to pull off at the Brooklyn Marine Terminal. Like, people have been talking about this for years, but we do not live in the 1950s anymore. We're in 2025.
Is there anything that wasn't already passed in City of Yes that you think, like, hey, we still need to do that?
I think the most important thing right now is something that the Charter Commission is working on, which is the ULURP process. And the idea that you have to go through this onerous, you know, many month project, whether it's a small rezoning, a large rezoning, they don't differentiate, everything comes down to one member of the city council, it's a mistake. It's something that's holding us back. It's a perfect example, of why politics in urban areas, which overwhelmingly has been Democratic for many years, is losing credibility. That is part of the point that Ezra Klein makes in Abundance, right? We can't get high-speed rail built. We can't get housing built. Why? We've created too many roadblocks. That is a major roadblock in New York City that needs to be reformed. There needs to be some appeal process. There needs to be the ability to go, to a borough-wide. Maybe the borough presidents need to play a bigger role. And I think, secretly, like a lot of council members would be relieved to have that pressure taken off their backs, that it's a broader set of folks who are weighing in on the importance of bringing housing. Now, again, credit to many city council members in this past city council who are calling for more housing in their backyard, and that's a big plus.
We've got about 3 minutes left, Andrew, and so, I had a few other things I was going to ask you about, but let me just kind of stick with AI, because I know you put out a big AI Advantage report and a big strategic plan around AI. Why is this important for New York? What's the opportunity here, and can you tell me about, at least one thing that you feel like we ought to do, or that you're doing?
AI is yet another example where EDC can play a fundamental role, picking up on recommendations from smart think tanks and others, but to drive innovation in New York. And really the reason we have this virtuous cycle of people wanting to come here with the diversity of sectors is because, 30 years ago, EDC started to do this around tech, and it's grown into life sciences. It's grown into the green economy, something that is still really powerful, despite all of the negativity around it at the federal level. 9 out of 10 young people, they want to be doing something positive around the economy the broader environment when they start a business. AI is both a tool that touches every sector, that is going to have impact, probably beyond the personal computer or the internet in terms of transforming business, but it's also a subsector in and of itself. Incredibly high percentage of tech startups that are focusing on AI. So how do we continue to drive that? I would argue, by the way, New York City is already the world's capital of applied AI, and that's because we have such a diversified sector. So whether it's accounting or finance or tech, AI is being applied everywhere. I think what are the key things? How do we continue to attract businesses here? So we're doing that by setting up a series of international landing pads. We are setting up, we have an RFP out for something called AI Nexus now, which will be to help support local small businesses and mid-sized businesses that might not be applying AI right now to apply it so that they keep ahead of the curve because it is going to pervade everything that we do. We're working with the libraries and with CUNY and with DOE on education so that young people are ready to take advantage of those skill sets. And I'll just, I know the last question, but I want to highlight one other project because I think it speaks to the values of EDC, the values of this administration more than any other one, and that's the Spark project at Kips Bay, Science Park and Research Campus. This is a full city block, 5 acres, that is where the Hunter Nursing School is today. It's been falling down for 30 years. Efforts to rebuild it all failed. When we came in, the plan was to put a large sanitation depot there. We thought we could do better. It's right next to NYU. It's right next to Alexandria and private sector biotech. But we thought here's a unique opportunity with public land where we can bring together DOE, CUNY, and the private sector to do something extraordinary. It's going to get back to AI in a second. And within 6 months, we raised $1 billion from the mayor and the governor for 3 CUNY schools to come there, a 2-year, a 4-year, and a graduate school, and a DOE STEM high school. Within a year, we had a master plan. We passed rezoning for the whole site about 4 months ago. This is light speed for big projects. We're going to go into construction in 6 to 8 months on the public side of the campus, have an RFP out for the private side of the campus. What is one sector in which AI, it's the most tangible example of where AI is going to improve lives. That is in healthcare and science. And so we are also going to announce soon an anchor tenant for the private side of the campus, focused entirely on the intersection of AI and life sciences, creating an ecosystem where those public schools are on the same physical block. There is something to proximity where they can go into the private businesses that'll also be on the campus, over a million square feet of private biotech there, where those entrepreneurs can go into the schools. You can have apprenticeships, internships, really create the pathways for our homegrown talent to diversify one of the most important sectors, and AI is going to be a big part of that.
Fantastic. Well, that's an amazing project, and I love the kind of co-location of universities, education, and kind of private jobs. That's so important. So anyway, join me in giving a big hand to Andrew Kimball. All right, well, we're going to keep the day... We're going to keep the day moving, but Andrew, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Eli Dvorkin, Editorial and Policy Director at Center for an Urban Future. I'm here to present one of 5 ideas from the Center for an Urban Future for retaining families in New York. My colleagues will present some more. Without further ado, let me share an idea around retaining young families. Since 2020, families with young children have been leaving New York City at more than twice the rate of other households. And when you ask them why, the top answer is clear: the lack of quality, affordable housing. The median asking rent for a 3-bedroom apartment now tops, $3,400 a month in every borough. And even 2-income households are being priced out. It's not just the cost, it's the lack of good options. Parents can't find apartments with enough space to grow in neighborhoods where they feel optimistic about raising children. At a certain point, it makes more sense to pour over job listings than real estate listings. Here's the deeper issue. New York City hasn't built nearly enough housing, and it really hasn't built enough family-sized housing. Over the past decade, the city helped finance about 191,000 units. Just 6,250 had 3 or more bedrooms. That's 3%. Why so few? Well, developers make more per square foot on smaller units, and city housing policy is focused on maximizing the number of apartments, not whether those apartments fit families. The solution starts with fixing this mismatch. City of Yes for housing was a very strong step in the right direction, but it left unaddressed the market issues around family-sized units. So going forward, the city and the state should create a density bonus for developers who commit to adding affordable family-sized units, a 3-bedroom bonus in city finance projects, and a requirement for family housing and developments on city-owned land, like those built above new libraries. But the city can do more to free up existing units, too. Today, more than 72,000 older New Yorkers live alone in 3+ bedroom homes. Some would gladly move to smaller, safer, more manageable housing if the right options and support existed. To get there, the city should pair new housing incentives with smart strategies to free up that existing supply, starting with helping more older adults right-size into homes that better meet their needs. That means building more affordable senior housing, including set-asides and mixed-income intergenerational developments. It means financing and supporting accessory dwelling units. But it also means that the city could create a housing navigator program to support older adults with guidance and counseling and offer a relocation stipend, say $1,000, to help cover those moving costs. And for those seeking connection, the city could help match older adults with roommates, building community, lowering expenses, and freeing up larger apartments for families who desperately need the space. If just 10% of those 72,000 New Yorkers relocated to smaller homes, we'd open up more family-sized housing in the cities than the city's affordable programs have built in a decade. For young families deciding whether they can remain New Yorkers, the difference may come down to one thing: an extra bedroom that they can afford. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Dory Block, Senior Editor at the Center for an Urban Future. The typical New York City family with young children spends about 25% of their income on childcare per child. For so many families, the math doesn't add up. But it's not just about the cost. Families are deeply concerned about quality, and availability, especially for infant and toddler care. For a lot of families, it's really reached a breaking point. When families can't find care that they trust at a cost they afford, they make impossible choices. A parent leaves the workforce, a promising job gets turned down, hopes for a second child are put on hold. And while women are disproportionately affected, this isn't just a women's issue. It's a family issue, and it's a major economic issue. If we want New York City to be thriving, inclusive, and to be a livable city, then childcare has to be part of our infrastructure, just like housing, transit, and schools. But right now, we're losing ground. Over the past decade, New York has lost nearly 8% of its licensed childcare providers. 14% of the city is considered a childcare desert with no providers at all. There's no question that with major new federal or state investment, New York could create a universal childcare system that works for every family. But until this becomes a reality, we need solutions now. That's where our proposed New York City Child Care Partnership Fund comes in. Modeled on Iowa's Child Care Solutions Fund, this initiative would use public dollars to unlock and inspire matching private and philanthropic contributions to expand childcare. In Iowa, the state oversees the public funds, and a nonprofit partner manages the private match, together investing in what works, growing supply by raising wages and stabilizing the workforce. Here in New York, the fund could go even further, helping effective childcare providers scale up to serve more families while strengthening their long-term sustainability. This could include wage boosts to attract and retain staff, capital grants to expand or upgrade facilities, and support with startup costs for second locations to help and add new seats in the communities that need them most. Crucially, this initiative would make it easier for the private sector to get involved in real solutions. Employers have a clear stake in solving this crisis. When workers have reliable childcare, they can stay and succeed in their jobs. But employers need a structured way to contribute, one that makes sense for their business and delivers for families. A child care partnership fund can do both. It can expand access to high-quality care, bring new resources to the table, and help make New York a place where more families can afford to stay and grow.
All right, if I could have our first group of panelists come and join me. Welcome, everyone. All right, especially for the folks in the live stream, if you want to bring your mics a little closer so they can hear you too. Jesse, you're all the way over there if you want to move one down. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, thanks to everybody tuning in online as well. I'll just briefly mention who I'm here with today, and then we'll get right into the conversation. To my left is Pratap Ranade. He's the CEO and co-founder of Arena. Next is Melva Miller, the founder of Melva M. Miller Associates and former CEO of Abney. And Jesse Hertzberg, investor and venture capitalist and the former CEO of Livestream. Welcome to all three of you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So we've already heard quite a bit so far this morning about why it's so important for the city's economic future that we retain young families and young people here. But we've talked about it, I would say, at a more of a 40,000-foot level. We'd like to kind of take it down to the real lived experience that all three of you bring to the table. It's folks that are entrepreneurs, have started businesses, with extensive experience in the civic sector in New York. And let me start maybe, Pratap, by asking you, when you decided to start a deep tech company, I imagine there were a lot of folks who thought, well, you're doing this in the Bay or Southern California, or maybe you're doing it in Texas, but you chose to do that here. Before we even get at what the challenges are, I'd love to hear a little bit more about why did you choose New York? What were those factors that made New York so attractive to you? And then we could talk a little bit about how do we make sure we continue to attract the future Prataps of the world to want to start and grow their companies here.
No, thanks. This is a question we still actively get every day, which is why are you here? It's probably like the first question every time we're out on the West Coast. And I think, for me, my last company I started in the Bay Area, and it was a very deliberate decision to come back to New York. I think there's the hypothesis we had, and I think that's working for us right now is, one is, New York is incredibly exciting. And if you think about that from a young person's perspective, it's probably just effectively a function of population density, but it's exciting. There's, the second part is it's very diverse, and I don't just mean like culturally and ethnically, professionally. And I think that was one of the things, if you think about like the first principles drivers of innovation, it's when you have different professions sort of like bumping up against each other. You have like, creative fields, you have hardware fields, you have software fields. If you go to the Bay Area, there's incredibly strong bias towards software. But I think if you look back, way back in history, even the Renaissance, those are the ingredients for great innovation. And so that was a very much a bet over here, that young people would want to come here and they would have better ideas here. And we've been able to, I would say, successfully, just like New York, the magic of New York itself, pulled a lot of great engineers from the Pacific Northwest, from Amazon, from Microsoft, from Boeing. From the Bay Area and Southern California, it's still sort of a fight, and I think that's related to kind of one of the issues that you're talking about. But definitely seeing this clear desire to be here, can we create more of those opportunities?
Yeah, that's really helpful, Pratap. And Jesse, let me bring you in as well. As somebody who's worked with a lot of companies or working with coaching founders right now, when they're considering New York, what do you tell them as they think about that decision? What do you see as the fundamentals that are attracting and retaining our talent here? What's working?
I violently agree with Pratap. Those are all the reasons why founders build companies here. There's many reasons to build a company in Silicon Valley, but you go to a restaurant and everyone's having a conversation about one thing. And here it's the intersection of ideas, talent, industry, creativity. That's why people are building companies here. That's why people want to work here, and that's why college graduates are moving here to join our companies.
So I want to bring in Milva, and I'm sorry to tee you up with some of the bad news, but we heard a little bit so far about, what's that value proposition, what's working, and I think embedded in that is, that companies know that they can hire and retain the talent, or at least hire the talent they need here. But let's talk about retention. When I look at the data, and Andrew mentioned earlier that we're starting to move back toward the pre-pandemic mean. We're not losing 18% of our, children under 5 right now. What we are doing, though, is we're continuing to do what we were doing even before the pandemic, which is losing families. That is not a new trend for New York. It accelerated during the pandemic, but just the fact that we're reverting to the mean doesn't mean we've solved the problems here. We were losing families before 2020. It just got worse. So tell us a little bit about why, before we get into diagnosing the problem, why is that so critically important for New York City's future?
Yeah, we just heard, right, why it's important for us to not only attract talent to New York, but also to keep talent is because we want employers to come here to sort of move the economic engine of the city. But really why it's really important to keep young families in New York, whether it's attracting new ones or keeping the ones that are homegrown, is because one, they are the economic engines of our city, right? They are the wage earners, they're the taxpayers. They are usually coming at a wage range that is fueling the local economy, whether it's local businesses, whether it is public services like childcare and things like that. They are the wage earners, so it's really important to keep them here. Also, they are the sort of the engine that stables our neighborhoods, right? They make them diverse, right? They make them stable. They make them places where there is opportunity to grow. And when we lose them, that's when we see sort of this flight from either the higher earners, or we see the lower earners really struggling. They're also the pipeline for civil servants, right? Usually young families come in again, whether it's straight out of college or whether they earn a certificate or a trade. They are really the ones that sort of go, you see their children in our schools, they use public transportation. They are the individuals who really drive public service in New York City. So really, if we lose them, we lose the advocacy for things like public transportation, for things like affordable housing, for things like libraries. And also, if we lose them, we also see a dearth in civic participation, right? Young families are usually the ones who are triple prime voters. They're the ones who are really engaged in the civic and public sort of process in New York, and if we lose them, then we start to see a deterioration of the fabric of New York City.
Well, that's starting to get at some of the consequences of this problem, Melba, which is helpful. And I'd love to ask all of you a little bit more about what you see as the contributors to this challenge. I mean, when you first of all, I'd love to have you help us understand, maybe Pratap, we can go back to you. So many companies like yours are so reliant on 20-somethings wanting to be here. And as you all described, and as we heard Andrew and Jonathan describe earlier, there's some really good news there. We have 500,000 college-age New Yorkers who've come into New York City since 2021. NYU saw a record high 120,000 students apply for the coming fall semester. But the data also shows that we're having a really hard time holding on to those 20-somethings. So I guess, Pratap, I'd like to start with you. Do you see that in your own workforce? Do you see that with your peers who are also founders? Are we starting to see the impacts of 20-somethings getting into their 30s and thinking, I don't know that I can stay here?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something we're concerned about, and we do see a little bit. I think if you think, and they're correlated. It's not just that you age out, you're 20-something, you want to start a family, and you leave. It has a consequence on the layer below too. So if you think about our pitch to a young person is come here, young Jedi, and learn to be great, right? But you need like Obi-Wan, right? And Obi-Wan's leaving because and that's sort of the problem we have. In fact, I'll give you a real example. The CTO of my last company loves New York. He's met his wife at a cafe in New York. They're both absolutely obsessed, and they live in the Bear and they won't move back. And it's a real concept. I literally was 14 days ago convincing him and his wife to join this company. They said yes, but they're like, but we need to be remote. And that was specifically because they just had a kid, right? And so you think about these things, how can we make that a little easier? You have two people who are highly talented, they want to be here, anyone would invest in them, but from a structural perspective, they're in a Bay Area suburb. So I think there's definitely, again, still case by case, we're in there, but I think, affordable housing that's close by. I think one of the big benefits is in New York, public transit is great, right? They're great. I'm in Palo Alto, and it's a 2.5-hour drive to go into San Francisco. That sucks. You're not actually going to go into the office more than 5 days a week. But here you want to. People want to. So the ingredients are all there. But imagine if we had more, again, like you were talking about, market rate housing available nearby. I think it could change the game.
Jesse, what do you think? I mean, we talked a little bit before this event about what could be a laundry list of different priorities, but when you actually talk to founders, you talk to folks that are HR running companies, what do they see as the problem?
Yeah, I look at, I look at my lived experience, and I look at the 20-somethings and 30-somethings that work at the companies that I've run, and it's all about housing and education. So, we made a choice to raise our kids here. Housing was incredibly difficult, incredibly expensive. Until 4 years ago, we lived in a 2-bedroom. But the quality of public schools made it a tenable option. Living in New York City, was a choice that we weren't willing to compromise on. Housing's very difficult. When the schools when the quality of public schools become a question, then the housing compromises become one you're not willing to make. And what I saw, especially post-COVID, was when the schools became a question, that pushed a lot of the flight of the folks who worked at our companies out of the city. That was when it was no longer something they would contemplate. They're like, we just don't want to, fight these battles anymore. So for me, there's a laundry list of stuff, but it's what can I afford, and are the public housing options going to make the city, quote unquote, affordable, insofar as the city is ever affordable. The folks who work at our companies, they dream of owning a house in Ridgewood or Jackson Heights or Astoria or anywhere in Brooklyn.
I love that they were all Queens neighborhoods.
They were. Queens is hot. Queens is hot. But especially with the knowledge workers at our companies, the education aspiration is so tied into the housing aspiration, you can't decouple them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Mel, I want to, speaking of Queens, I mean, Jesse, perfect segue. At least I think
segue.
two of us up on the panel right now are Queens residents. But Mel, I want to ask you about this. I mean, as somebody with deep roots in, southeastern Queens, the arguably, one of the epicenters of the middle class dream in New York City and for decades, right? Yeah. Are you seeing this on the ground in a neighborhood like Laurelton or Cambria Heights? Are you seeing, hey, what was the dream of a generation or two ago isn't the dream today? Are you seeing that in the choices and the eyes of the 20-somethings that are growing up in those neighborhoods today? What does that look like?
Absolutely, it's the affordability, right? So those who grew up in neighborhoods, particularly in places like Queens, where home ownership was not only the number one key driver for stability, but also was the key driver for generational wealth, we're finding that these young families can't afford to live there. Right. I think, what's from my lived experience and also someone who is very proud of that New York City magic that you talked about, a lot of the work that I've done has been to make sure that we are attracting and keeping young families in places that they grew up in, and it's become really difficult because of the affordability, because of the quality of schools. But places like Laurelton, Cambria Heights, Southeast Queens, where it has been highly documented that the median income of the individuals living in those neighborhoods have historically outpaced other similar communities of different ethnic backgrounds, are really struggling to really survive. We see out-migration every day, whether it's because of public safety, whether it's because of affordability, whether it's because of public services. We talk about transportation, right? Transportation is the great equalizer, and places like Southeast Queens or those bedroom communities have struggled with quality and equitable transportation for so long, right? So as we, and there have been some strides, right? We have the city ticket from the Long Island Railroad making sort of off-peak more accessible, but there's still a huge struggle in transportation. So, what's happening, especially for communities like Southeast Queens, where you have communities of color, whether it's African American, whether it's Hispanic, that have generally used sort of education as a tool for a foothold into the middle class or working class, we're seeing those young families not being able to afford sort of the lifestyle that the generations previously have been able to do. And what we're also seeing again is that civic erosion, right, in communities like Southeast Queens. As we see an out-migration of these families that were the stable entities, we're seeing, changes in, houses of worship. We're seeing civic participation decrease in terms of, block associations and different mechanisms that really held communities together. But, this is something that I've tracked for a really long time, especially when it has to do with African American families leaving New York City, and we need to do better.
Well, let's talk a little bit about maybe what doing better looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll go right back to you on this, but I mean, when you talk about maybe affordability is at the heart of this, a neighborhood with mostly, single-family homes, although a neighborhood that also was generally supportive of City of Yes for housing, which many neighbors just across the Van Wyck were not. There's some challenges there. Yeah. But what do you see as some of the key solutions here, or at least talking about the goal? If the goal is retaining more of those families we're losing, and again, the data really shows in 2020 we were losing some of the 1% families. Right. In 2019 and 2021 and 2022 and 2023 and 2024, we're back to the mean, which is we're losing middle-class families. Yeah. We're losing working and middle-class families. So tell me about what you see as the key elements of a solution.
Yeah, so we'll just start with housing. I'll start there. Being more creative and being more neighborhood focused in terms of solution on how to create more housing, right? So, there were proposals that weren't so successful in terms of creating additional housing in places that were more bedroom, one and two family homes, because I think the narrative around how to do that was too sort of blanket across the city, whereas like accessory dwelling units, right, is something that I've seen for years in my neighborhood in Laurelton, Queens, where folks have converted garages into really nice living living spaces, and it still gives that sort of one-family home sort of feel for those who might be afraid of what, increasing density will look like. I'm really looking at transit-oriented, development in a really smart way. Looking at the populations like seniors and young families, right? How can we increase density around Long Island Railroad stations in a smart way? I think putting that in the hands of community members to sort of shape that is really important. But coming up with additional housing options is absolutely necessary. We don't need necessarily really big, dense projects, but we can do with increased density in some of those neighborhoods. I think another key idea is to make, and I heard Andrew talk about this earlier, is sort of the 24-hour neighborhoods, right? I think in a lot of places in Queens, that concept just hasn't come into fruition. People talk a lot about downtown Jamaica, which is near and dear to my heart. I did my dissertation around that. People talk about places like Long Island City, but there are other neighborhoods where young families want live-work sort of a lifestyle, a balance, right, where they can walk to work, that they don't necessarily have to get on the train. But I think really looking at land use policies that prioritize neighborhoods that have struggled with that 24-hour livable community with arts, culture. Young kids, I know Ian in the back here, he's one of the younger Queens residents that have been a leader in a lot of the communities, but making sure that we keep him in Southeast Queens has been a struggle because, younger families are looking for something different. They want to be able to have, a place where there's dining options and entertainment options, but really think about smart land use policies in historically ignored neighborhoods to create those 24-hour livable neighborhoods, I think is also a great option.
Yeah, it's really helpful, Melva. I mean, just wrapped up, I want to bring in on some of the ideas here too, but I actually want to ask you guys something a little different first, which is, we just put out a report, earlier this week about the incredible growth of the city's tech sector, showing that 41% of all the new jobs added in New York City, net new jobs, since the pandemic have been in tech, for example. And as part of that report, I would say our top recommendation was actually addressing housing supply as the key to sustaining this pathway. We spoke to both of you for that report. But I want to ask you something that's a little adjacent to that, which is, what do we need to do as a city to get the private sector more involved with what we're discussing here today? Are you seeing this among your friends and colleagues who are startup founders? Are folks thinking civically about how do we get involved around housing or education? Is there a sense of that's not our job, or that's something that maybe other kind of legacy industries in New York, they've got the connections to policy? What do you see as kind of essential for getting more leaders in our economy to get behind conversations around solving this problem?
Yes, I think intellectually, it's definitely a discussion topic at the company. So people care, people think about it. I think if you think about a startup, you're basically in this extreme situation where you've learned something where you have an advantage with technology, you put a little capital in, add a lot of labor, and you can get huge gains out, especially right now with AI. I think the whole playing field is crazy. So it's frenetic at the company, right? It's like a completely triage prioritization in terms of everything that we do. I think one of the special things about New York is we opportunistically even had this conversation and therefore, are here. It's one of those things where making that accessibility or on-ramp obviously easy. I think people would love to participate, but it's sort of one of those things where you're great, that's once you're at Goldman Sachs, then you have teams that go and deal with that and push that thing out to your public company. But it's just not on that burn down list, but it is something we care about. So I think as that becomes easier and this sort of connectivity happens, I think there's places to participate, and we're excited to. Even us being here, this was my entire experience with city ideas has come from SimCity. I'm probably this is probably the most informed I've ever been. So
yeah, there's no Euler process in SimCity. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, Jesse,
when you're scaling, there are no cycles for anything else. There are no free cycles. I will say, when you achieve, when you achieve escape velocity and you've achieved a certain size, and you're moving beyond the intellectual conversations at dinner, you do start to think about this stuff. I will say, my experience at our companies as they got larger is that there was some government engagement, there was some reach out, but it never struck me as there was much reach out to the tech community. It always felt, I wouldn't say de minimis, but it always felt relatively small. It never felt like we were prioritized by political officials or reached out to very often for input on questions like you're asking. Yeah.
It's helpful. And I think part of what we're talking about today is how do you kind of build the critical mass of voices and support of some of these key investments and changes for the sake of our future economy. So let me ask you all just one last quick question, and then we'll turn it over to our audience for a couple of minutes, which is, I mean, I think, Melba, you gave us a few of your own thoughts, but Jesse Pretop, I wanted to give you a chance to just tell us, if you have one idea, big or small, that you think would help tackle this, this retention issue, what would you advise folks to do?
Build. I mean, listening to Andrew was very inspiring. You know, him talking about taking all that New York City land and building, you know, I don't have solutions, but just build. And I don't know who spoke about building larger units, but that is the issue. Like, as soon as somebody starts to have a family, the conversations about leaving, like, it just breaks my heart. Like, every time somebody moves to the river towns, I just like cry inside. It's so sad.
President, I'll ask you a question generally about recommendations. I'd also be curious if there's something we've talked a lot for good reason about housing. We started to talk a little bit about education, but if there's anything else that you also think, hey, from your experience, this needs to be on that short list of key policy areas, I'd love your thoughts there too.
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered the big ones, which is like housing, transport, and schools. I think the other thing which we see a little bit emerging is, you know, if you mentioned, I think in the prior conversation, just briefly about AI, if you think about what is happening, it is massively, it's starting to commoditize a lot of like knowledge work actually and software work. So I think it's actually a really interesting opportunity where, you know, I don't know if you've heard this term, the full stack AI company. It's actually got nothing to do with AI. It's just doing existing things better. So I think what we're seeing is, you know, a lot more like, you think about all of, and I think it's really good because you're taking a lot of these domains, like literally like things like welding, like practical things, and smashing them up with software engineers to build kind of companies that do those things. And so for that, there's lab space, right? We like looked at our own building lease, and like we can do some things, like some lab stuff, and we can't have a circus. I don't know why that's in the lease, but if you think about some of the zoning, it's like one of the, every time we go out to El Segundo, California, you have an office of software engineers, and they pop over to a flight test range, and they're testing stuff. So, you know, we're building like a flight cage in the office, but as that starts to happen, how can we do a little bit more? That would be just, again, something outside of the top three. I think the three are the ones we covered, but I think we're going to see more of that. I think it's a huge opportunity, but what could we, you know, could we make it easier for companies to access at that stage some of those facilities or some of that space where you're zoned to do some physical hardware testing? Yeah.
That's really interesting. Love it. So let's turn it over to our audience for just a few minutes. I think we have time for probably a couple questions for our amazing panelists. So this is just so everybody knows, this is how it's going to work the rest of the morning. I've got two colleagues with microphones. Put your hands up. Let us know where you are. We'll come to you. Please keep your question brief so we can get to as many folks as possible, and just let us know your name if you're here with an organization, and we'll go from there. So yeah, I'll start right here with Aaron in the fourth row, and then you can bring that microphone back, yeah, with your hand up in the middle. Rachel, if you want to bring it back just to the middle row, I think a blue jacket right there. We'll just go for those two.
Hi, I'm Erin. I'm here with Brooklyn Org, kind of consultant. But my question is about the transit, because it's documented that the Second Avenue subway produced a huge increase in the value of real estate stock in those neighborhoods on the Upper East Side, and not a lot of that was captured by the MTA or by the city. Like, that value tended to go into private coffers, and I'm curious if that can be integrated into, or consideration of that can be integrated into the sort of development that you all are talking about, and how could that work? I don't know anything about development, but curious how that could work.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I'm going to go ahead and just take one more question, and just we'll get a couple of things going. And then, yeah, Rachel, just behind the pole, I think you probably can't see, just I saw the hand up first. Yep, right there. Okay, got you. Yep.
Hi, my name is Alexis Foote, and I'm one of the founders of the Real Edgemere Community Land Trust, Residents Acquiring Land. And so my question is, how can we get rid of the AMI? How do we get rid of AMI?
Got it. Okay. Well, we can start if anybody wants to jump in. I would just say more broadly. I mean, we've got a couple of things here. Melville, maybe I'll turn to you, but I'm thinking about housing, value capture, other strategies. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So are you saying that the increase in value of the real estate, how do we capture some of that value and put it back into public transportation?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a really
It's expensive to build, there should be a benefit to the builders for the value that they're making.
yeah. I think that's a really interesting policy suggestion because we've seen similar things like, for instance, business improvement districts, right? Who come in and for, some new developments, those developments are required in lieu of taxes or more creatively pay into the public landscape of, right? So I don't have an answer. I think that that's a great policy solution. But, as we know, right, the amenities around real estate adds to the value of that real estate. So how does the public sector, or the builder in this case, sort of capture that for future development? Because as we know, we still need more public transportation. We need not only the improvements of existing and the upgrades of stations, but also we need new subway lines and new bus lines and things of that nature. So I don't have an answer for you, but I think that's a great policy idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just as an observation, I mean, it is the most expensive train per kilometer in the world by orders of magnitude. And then, you walk on Second Avenue and all the above-ground structures that the MTA built have no retail, which, obviously could be revenue generating and creates black holes on those blocks, which is Jane Jacobs 101. All sorts of issues, just I'm sure we're tied to attempts to cost cut or whatnot, but I think it's a great point.
Great. Okay, we'll grab 2 more questions. So why don't we go, back to the other side. Orange sweater, you can see, just keep your hand up so my colleague can just bring you the microphone. Great, thank you.
Thank you so much for this interesting panel. I'd like to focus our attention on childcare.
Yeah.
I run One World Project, which is a Spanish immersion community center, and critical to our work is programs for children between 6 months and 5 years. We participate in the city's universal pre-K program for our 4-year-olds, and we had to say no to the 3K contract because it's a deficit contract. It doesn't allow us to pay our teachers a living wage or provide health insurance, and so, nor does it with our UPK contract. But annually, we sign a deficit contract, and then we have to fundraise as a community to bridge the gap between DOE funding and the cost of running a high-quality program. And so I just wanted to go to the point around the Child Care Private Partnership Fund, and we'd love to hear from you as to how do we make it easy for entrepreneurs to invest in innovative, high-quality childcare. We're based in Brooklyn. I'd love to invite your friends to come to Windsor Terrace so that they could enroll in a program that really, our mission is to support global citizens and stewards of the environment. So that's everything we do, and we do it by doing Spanish, but also having a really high-quality program.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I mean, maybe we can just break it into 2 parts. I think the first one, maybe Pratap and Jesse, is how big an issue is childcare for your companies, your workforce right now? And we can maybe talk also a little bit, maybe Belva, you want to jump in at all on, some of the potential solutions to get the private sector more involved?
Yeah.
I mean, major issue, like very practically, I think for most of our senior engineers, I think that's myself also now. It's, we as a company would be willing to put some of our literal dollars to work if it actually materially changed it. And even at our stage where we're Series B stage. But if there are, I love the idea earlier, but if there are conduits for us to do that, to drive that back, we're just seeing actual productivity loss, right? So I think that's, we would be willing to put money into it. I think the question we'd have is a little bit where to put it.
Yeah, I would also tie it back to my comments earlier on education. I think one of the smartest things Mayor Adams ever said was that the equity issues, when you look at specialized high schools, et cetera, Mayor Adams said that they start at 3 years old. The equity issues don't begin in high school. The equity issues begin with the number of books in the child's home and pre-K education. So I don't have a solution, but it's a practical problem for all of us with our employees, and it's a real funding issue that needs to be solved, and it ties right back to the education concerns that I brought up earlier that will keep the employees in the city longer.
So I think it goes back to something you said earlier about government not reaching out to the private sector to get ideas, and this was a great opportunity to do that. And then also the point you made about sort of the mechanism to do it, right? And I think it's really, I think there are opportunities for the private sector who want to contribute. I'm working on a project at JFK Airport, and just a little bit of innovation in accessing resources really brought up an idea to create a childcare center in one of the airport terminals, right? Pre-security. There are incentives from the city and from the state to create these childcare centers, right? And we were able to be that conduit, that mechanism to apply for the funding, link it to the requirements of childcare deserts, right? But actually being the conduit to put the program together for the private sector partner, which is the airport terminal, to make the contribution, the financial contributions into the airport terminal. So I think it's really about understanding and assessing the needs of the private sector, because we want to keep them engaged. They are the economic engines, especially sectors like tech. We need their revenue, but be that sort of conduit to bring them into the conversation to understand their needs and how they can contribute, and then also reach out to whether it's a nonprofit or if it's another organization that could be that mechanism to put the pieces together so that childcare centers can be created. I also just wanted to address the AMI question that was raised earlier about how do we change it. Yes, we need to change it. I mean, there's been some movement around the real cost of living with the city charter. There's been some real movement, with the Social Justice Commission around how to really look at what affordability means. But AMI is usually the huge obstacle to getting affordable housing, and we need to do some advocacy work still around that for New York City.
All right, thanks, Melva. I think we have time for maybe one more question. So yeah, I'll go to Rosa in the front. You want to bring a microphone? Sorry for the sprint. Awesome, thank you.
Hi, my name is Rosa Chang. I'm with Gotham Park. Hey, Melva, it's been a bit. So I was curious about the investment in public spaces, especially in communities of deep need, where, so I should say, Rosa Chang, Gotham Park, building a new public space underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, but on the Manhattan side, where we have a historically disadvantaged community, 64% BIPOC. Public spaces are where a lot of us, we just don't have open space in our buildings or in our apartments or right outside our house. It's where we actually teach people, especially young humans, to be humans that are comfortable with and engage with and open to enjoy diversity. People that don't look like them, people that don't talk like them, people that don't worship like them. And it's something that the city has constantly, as Eli and Cuff have so kindly pointed out, don't invest in very much in this city. But it's an essential part of being a New Yorker. How do we get more investment in the shared spaces that we have all around us so that we can encourage this sort of magic that happens when we all come into a room and talk to people who have different lived experiences than us, who have different thoughts about how we might tackle a problem, and maybe we could actually solve them together. How do we make the city, AKA us, every single one of us in this room, value, treasure, celebrate, and build these spaces?
Well, I'd love to chat with you after. I'm on the board of the Design Trust, and our mission is taking unused and underused space in New York City and turning it into public space. And the answer to the question isn't easy, but that is our mission and what we spend our time trying to help solve.
I mean, I'll jump right in. So we talk about maintaining young families in New York City, right? These shared spaces are so key to that because it's young families that I said before stabilize and keep our neighborhoods diverse, right? Younger families are more likely to live in communities that are a little bit more diverse economically as well as ethnically and culturally. And it's those public spaces that we sort of see this integration, which is really key. Again, I think there's models out there, right? When you say the city, you're absolutely right. It's not necessarily the city administration that we need to have do it. It's New York City, right? It's all of us. How do we invest? And again, there's models with public-private partnerships, so important, because usually the expense is not building the public space, it's maintaining the public space. And that's where you see some resistance from other residents because they're worried about the debris and the garbage and the loitering and things of that nature. So how do we sort of make those public spaces our own as New York City residents, not only to build them, but to maintain them and to keep them safe? I think is having all New Yorkers in the conversations to advocate for them. Let the city put up the capital costs, let there be a private sector partner to pay for maintenance, and that be the maintenance partner, but us as New York City residents sort of have ownership of those public spaces so that we protect them because they are key treasures, as you said, for all the reasons that you said, Rosa. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Melva. Thanks for the question. That's all the time we have for this amazing first panel. So if you all would join me in a round of applause. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, guys. And don't go anywhere. We will keep it moving right away.
Thank you.
Thanks for that great panel. Thanks for those wonderful questions. And we're going to keep this moving. The Center for Urban Future is really all about ideas. And we often at our events have idea pitches where we ask people across the city to come in and share a specific idea with us. And it's such a treat today that we actually have ideas from some of the people that are running to lead this city, to share an idea of what they would do or what they think the city should do around retaining young families in this city. And we're so thrilled to be starting this off, someone that I've known for probably over 25 years, everybody, former Comptroller Scott Stringer.
Good morning, everybody. Jonathan and I met in nursery school, so don't. But look, I'm so excited to be here. I'm going to give you my 3-minute pitch, but I want to say I come at this from two perspectives. The first is as a longtime government elected official, serving as borough president, controlling the assembly. But I also come to today through the lens of raising a young family. So I have a 13-year-old and 11-year-old. My wife and I are raising them in Manhattan. These are not my grandchildren, these are my actual children, so I want you to know that. That's a long story, I'll talk to you about that. But look, one of the things that we see as we live in the city and start to have kids and raise families is after the second child, you start looking around to leave the city because you can't afford it. Not only can you not afford it, you actually don't have space for your expanded family. And I remember my wife coming to me, we were longtime West Siders, and she said, look, we have a problem. We have a problem because Max and Miles and you and I are sharing one bathroom. So if you like this marriage, go get the second bathroom. And off I went, and it was not easy. So here's my plan. It's about making sure there are residential options for families. I call it ROOF. And what I'm proposing to do as mayor is to start looking at our vacant lots and building the next generation of affordable housing, but mandating that we start thinking about building units or rehabbing them for 2 bedrooms or more. Right now, HPD allocates very little subsidy for larger apartments. I want to change that. 50% of HPD subsidized units should go to 2 bedroom or more. 10%, 15% of those units, 3 bedrooms or more. We should start upsizing apartments to keep families here, to put down affordable housing. I estimate in 4 years, we can build 42,000 units of 2 bedrooms or more, either rehabbed or brand new construction. We have 1,000 vacant lots in the city. This is city-owned property. This is our way, working with Jonathan and all of you, to think about using that land to fill in the gaps for families in the city. So that is my pitch. One of you may very likely be the city planning commissioner in my administration, so hold on to this thought. We'll talk after the general election, but it's really great to be here with all of you, and let's get some ideas on the table. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks again, Scott. Thank you. All right, our next 2 idea pitches from mayoral candidates will be submitted by video. So look at the screen. They are from City Council Speaker Adrian Adams and Comptroller Brad Lander.
I'm Adrienne Adams, and I'm running for mayor with one goal at heart: building a city where young families can not only survive, but thrive. Today I want to talk about a single idea that can transform life for thousands of New York families: expanding childcare for working families. Here's the truth. If we want to keep young families in this city, we need to make it possible for them to stay. Right now, too many parents, especially mothers, are being pushed out of the workforce, not because they want to leave, but because they simply can't afford childcare. In New York City, infant and toddler care can cost more than $24,000 a year. For a family making $125,000, a solid middle-class income, that's 20% of their entire household budget. That's rent, groceries, transportation, all squeezed just to pay for care. And here's the kicker. Families just barely over the current income limit for child care assistance, $108,000 for a family of 4, get nothing. No support. They're stuck in that in-between, making too much money to qualify for help, but not enough to actually afford care. That's not just a burden, it's a barrier to growth, to opportunity, and to staying in this city. So here's what I'm proposing. The new city-funded child care support that covers at least half the cost of care, up to $12,000 per child annually, for families earning more than $108,000 a year. This is more than financial relief. It's a lifeline. It means parents can stay in the workforce. It means small businesses have a stronger, more reliable labor pool. It means families can breathe easier and plan for a future in this city. And it's achievable. We need more state funding for childcare, yes, but we also need to step up as a city. That means the city is creating expanded access to this childcare help so families can use it flexibly, whether that's a daycare center, a home-based provider, or a trusted neighborhood caregiver. Investing in childcare isn't just about kids, it's about families. It's about economic mobility, and it's about keeping this city livable for the people who make it work. New York families deserve better, and if I'm mayor, we're going to deliver. Thank you.
Hello, Center for Urban Future. I'm New York City Controller Brad Lander. Thank you for all the great work and partnership over many years and for allowing me to join you to make this pitch. Confronting the affordability crisis is essential for our urban future, for families to be able to stay and thrive here, to keep the vibrant culture of diversity that is our city's beating heart, and for businesses to choose to start and grow here. That's why I put affordability at the center of my campaign, with plans to fulfill the promise of pre-K and 3K and to expand universal childcare with 2K and after-school programs, saving young families tens of thousands of dollars every year. That's why I focused on helping families earn more. Legislation I passed has made the city the first place in the country to guarantee living wage pay for Uber drivers and deliveristas, stable schedules for fast food workers, and protection against wage theft for freelancers, putting literally billions of dollars in the pockets of hundreds of thousands of New York's working families. My proposal for a mayor's office of workers' rights would keep all that going. But at the heart of the affordability crisis is housing. The city's vacancy rate has dropped to 1.4%, lowest since 1968. Asking rents for the average unit now top $3,500. That's what's driving families out of the city. That's what I've been working on my whole career. And that's why I put forward a bold housing plan that will generate 500,000 homes over the next decade. On day one, I'll declare a housing emergency to speed up housing construction, protect tenants, restore the pathway to homeownership, and fix HPD and NYCHA. Now here's my pitch. Did you know that New York City has 12 municipal golf courses? That's 2,500 acres of city-owned land. in a city that desperately needs more affordable housing. So, when I'm mayor, we'll build great new neighborhoods on 4 of the city's 12 municipal golf courses. We'll still have 8, so plenty of tee time for the golfers, but with that much city-owned land, we can build 50,000 homes that are cheaper and easier to build, and so more affordable to working families. These homes will be in great new neighborhoods, accessible to transit, with new parks and open space, small businesses and schools, libraries. With this land, we can create homes for New York's working families to rent or to buy. One key to the success of the Mitchell-Lama program 50 years ago was building new neighborhoods that became havens for working families. This will allow us to do it again. In 1996, my wife and I were able to buy a co-op in Brooklyn for $125,000. That's why Meg and I were able to raise Marek and Rosa here. But that's become impossible for young families today. This will make it possible again for tens of thousands of young families to buy homes in great neighborhoods where their kids can thrive. These 50,000 homes in new neighborhoods will be one part of the 500,000 homes we build citywide with affordable childcare, with good schools, in great and safe neighborhoods that allow families to stay in the city they love. That's an urban future we can all get behind. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Rachel Netjes, a data researcher at the Center for an Urban Future, and I'll be presenting another CUF idea today. For working families in New York City, summer can be one of the hardest times of the year. School ends, but jobs don't. And options for summer-only daycare, camps, or programs are expensive, competitive, and limited. This makes New York City Park's Summer Day Camp one of the best deals in town. $575 for 7 weeks of safe, full-time summer fun. That's $575 for the whole summer, parents. You heard that right. And no, there are no seats available. In 2022, just 549 kids were enrolled across all 5 boroughs. That's out of more than 700,000 families citywide with school-aged children. At a time when so many families are deciding whether or not they can make it work in this city, that's a missed opportunity. And the demand is real. Some popular, affordable summer programs were already full last October, 8 months before summer even begins. That's why the mayor should expand the New York City Park's Summer Day Camp to serve at least 5,000 children. Solving the summer scramble is one of the most cost-effective ways to support working parents, improve kids' well-being, and make our city more livable for families. Expanding the program wouldn't require a huge investment. Hiring about 450 additional seasonal counselors at a starting wage of about $19 an hour would cost the city roughly $2.7 million. But with 5,000 campers enrolled, the program could generate $2.5 million in revenue to help offset those costs. At least some of these positions should be filled by new full-time recreation staff who run camp in the summer and support after-school programs the rest of the year, helping the city boost quality while reducing turnover and training costs. To make room, the city should start by expanding camps to all 21 recreation centers, only some of which host camps today. But don't stop there. Program leaders can get creative by using field houses, nature centers, community gardens, and nearby schools or cultural venues to open up more spaces. We know that these experiences can help kids thrive socially, emotionally, and academically. We know they help parents stay in the workforce. This modest investment could give thousands of families a compelling new reason to stay in New York. Let's transform summer from a stress test for families into a season that kids and their frazzled parents can look forward to every year. Thank you.
Good, thanks for doing this. All right, welcome everyone. Good morning. Does that sound ready for our plenary panel of the day? Let's try one more time. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, there we go. Bring the energy back. Again, I'm Eli Dvorkin, Editorial and Policy Director at Center for an Urban Future. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're so honored to have you with us for this conversation. Also, thank you to everybody tuning in on the live stream, at least 100 or so folks there, maybe more. And we will get to your questions as well. I know the folks at home or at their offices, they have questions too. Our colleagues see your questions in the chat, and we'll get there later in this conversation. But first, let me just start by introducing our amazing panelists. Just briefly, I'll mention who's up here with me. Their full bios are in your packets. If you could scan that QR code, you can read all about their extensive biographies. But let me just mention, we're so thrilled to be joined by Kirk Goodrich, the CEO of Monadnock Development. We're thrilled to be joined as well by Kelly Escobar, the Managing Director of Early Childhood at Robin Hood. Winston Fisher, partner at Fisher Brothers, CEO of Area 15. My favorite title of yours, Winston, the co-founder and creator of the Middle Class Jobs Project with Center for an Urban Future. And Grace Bonilla, the president and CEO of United Way of New York City. Welcome to all of you. Thrilled to have you. Let's come up with some solutions for retaining young families. But let me start actually by a little bit more establishing what we see as the problem today. And Grace, I'll start with you, in part because United Way has been publishing this incredibly compelling report on the true cost of living in New York City. And I say compelling, another word might be terrifying. Your data shows just how unaffordable the city's become for the majority of New Yorkers. And I want to ask you about this in part because I'd love for you to help us understand, help our audience understand who really is struggling to get by in New York City today. In a city with significant ongoing challenges with poverty, we're talking about millions of other New Yorkers who are not able to see a path to making it paycheck to paycheck. Who are those New Yorkers? How has that picture changed in the past decade or so? And how much is this gap between incomes and expenses contributing to this outmigration of families?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. So I think it's important to say that we've been talking a lot about the families who actually have resources to leave New York City. There's an entire group of families who actually cannot leave New York City, get stuck in poverty, but are not poor enough for benefits. And the report showed, and we were really actually anxious when the report came out because it was the first report that was looking at what was the economic mobility of folks post-COVID. And what we found was that 50% of New Yorkers were not able to make ends meet on any given month. That starts to get a little bit worse when you start to play with the numbers. But let's focus on the 50%. What we also learned is that 80% of them are actually working and half of them have a college degree. It starts to get worse when you start to look at single women with children under 5. Which is why I'm so excited that we're talking about childcare. Childcare is definitely a solution. And for that group of women with children under 5, it's about 86% of them who cannot make ends meet. But I will urge us not to just focus on the 0 to 5, because once you move to above 5, which is why we are fighting so hard for also universal after school, 65% of families with kids under 5 cannot make ends meet. So what we found is that the 3 drivers of expenses are rent, childcare, transportation. And I could throw a bunch of other numbers, but those are the folks that we're really focused on and figuring out how do we find solutions for them.
Thanks, Grace. It's powerful numbers, and I think it underscores that we're talking about a very large number of New Yorkers who aren't able to access many forms of support and a social safety net that's fraying as it is, but who may have some options when it comes to leaving New York, and others who maybe don't. But Winston, I want to ask you a little bit about the folks that do have some options for leaving New York. The kind of middle-class families that may really see anywhere from North Carolina to Atlanta to Texas or beyond as more appealing right now. And I'm asking you about this in part because we know that New York is in a global competition for talent, that we have, as Andrew mentioned at the beginning, have no greater strength in New York City's economy than our magnetism for smart and capable and ingenious people. But that when we see that we're losing families and that we were even before the pandemic, it starts to threaten that competitiveness. So I want to ask you about where do you see the city needing to focus its efforts to become more, to improve its value proposition for families today? And are there other cities that you've been to that you see that you think are getting it right? What are we maybe missing there?
I mean, in some sense, it's a little, I'm going to repeat what people have said, right? Because the reality is, when you're looking at economic development, economic attraction, and what keeps people here, housing, safety, affordability, childcare is a huge issue, right? 0 through 5. And it's a national problem, right? It's not just New York City, but it's exacerbated here. It's a race to get it right. People do go to North Carolina. They do go to Texas. It's a series of things, but it's really, I wish there was some magic to it. It's just that straightforward of create a better environment for families to stay here because they want to stay here. Companies go where the talent is today. And so New York, really, almost sometimes in spite of itself, is incredibly attractive because the talent is here. But as talent leaves, companies leave. It's just that straightforward. And so that's why Texas is doing well today. It is why Austin, they're setting up, you see Apple is down there, Tesla moved, or SpaceX, whatever, moved down there. There is competition. They're going there. Miami is not New York, but people have gone there. They're setting up shop because it's more affordable. And so we just have to do it. I mean, I wish I had some magic to it other than we know that women, especially, or single families leave, but mostly women leave the workforce. That statistic you said. 0 through 5 is absolutely critical because it's not just the tax on that family, it's the lifetime earnings of that person when they leave the system. So now they're not just disadvantaged for that moment, they're disadvantaged for a lifetime. And so we have to start making it affordable for people to have families here. And it's really straightforward, but we got to do it. That's the difference.
Well, Kirk, let's talk about doing it a little bit.
You went out of order. I got confused.
Yeah, I want to ask you about this. I mean, because, Kelly, obviously, childcare has been such a key thread. But Kirk, I do want to bring you in because so far in this conversation this morning, housing has been, on most people's minds, issue 1, 2, and 3. Let's dig in a little bit deeper. I mean, when it comes to affordability, it strikes me we've got major problems, of course, with undersupply, decades in the making. We've got questions about aligning subsidy with affordability goals, whether that's federal policy issues like AMI or whether we're talking about how the city designs its programs. We've got policy choices that contribute to higher costs, that make it more expensive to build here. So if the next mayor wants to be remembered for making housing more affordable, where do you start? What do you see as the absolute keys to making progress on this, on the issue that everybody agrees is number one?
So the message and the strategy aren't exactly the same in the diagnosis of the problems. So I've said to folks, my message would be simple, and it's like informed by my background, right? I have people in my family who struggle with addiction, mental illness, who've been homeless, and my mom and others in my family who are working people who came to this country with not a lot, and then in 12 years able to work their way up and buy a home. That doesn't exist anymore. That's my measure. Can you do what my parents did between 1962 and 1974? Can you come here, bust trays and work on a tray line in a hospital kitchen or a job at that level, and then own a home? You can do it in other cities. You can't do it here. And so that's a simple measure. That's my measure. With respect to addiction and mental illness and chronic homelessness, we spend a lot of money, but we failed in New York in a catastrophic way. And that's not only because it's inconvenient or problematic for people who aren't living with mental illness and addiction to deal with folks who may be on the street, but we essentially have failed those individuals and their families, and we deal with the outcome of that as do they. And we just put people in prison. We've actually, in the 50s, state psychiatric hospitals for folks who need long-term care, had a census over 500,000. Now that's down to whatever, 38,000. Where did those people go? Well, 300,000 of the people who are incarcerated nationally have chronic and serious mental illness. So we're not spending less. We just kind of moved them to another institution. So my measures generally would be, and message would be, how do we deal with chronic and serious mental illness and people who have addiction in terms of their housing outcomes? And why can't working people afford the city? And those are the problems I would try to solve. Fundamentally, I see housing as a bundle of goods and services. People have heard me say that before. And while we've produced a lot of housing for people, we haven't produced the right type of housing, and we've failed to have a superior bundle of goods for people. If you live in East New York, Brownsville, large parts of the Bronx and other parts of our city, you have an inferior bundle of goods. There's nothing in those neighborhoods that's as good as the Upper West Side or Park Slope. And that's a failure of fair housing. The fair housing folks spent a lot of time making sure people who look like me could buy a home in Malibu or the Upper West Side or wherever. What they didn't solve for, whether it's in 1954 or 1896 or today, is if I don't want to move to Park Slope or Tribeca and I want to stay in East Flatbush where I grew up, which I did, why can't my kids get a good education? Why don't they figure that out? But they spend a lot of time suing the city and HPD around a variety of other things. But the fundamental fair housing issue of our day, which is the same as it was in 1896, separate but equal is not equal, they haven't figured out, even though we spend 38 grand a student. So I would say it's a failure of affordable housing. I'm including myself in that, with respect to housing outcomes for people, but also in fair housing, we failed as well. Sorry, I don't know if that answers your question. I only got one speech.
I loved it, Kirk.
If you ask me another question, I'm going to give you the same
I was
answer.
so wrapped with attention, I kind of lost track of my next question. And it sounds like our audience agrees.
I used to use that when I was dating, too, just so you know. So just dazzle them, and next thing you know, it's over.
That's going to attract the right kind of person, Kirk, who's attracted to that answer. But well, let's stay on this topic for a minute, because you put a lot on the table, Kirk. I want to get into all of it. Let's keep going on housing for a minute, and I want to open this up to everybody. I think part of what I'd like to unpack a little bit more is where the city has lost the thread in terms of getting behind housing everywhere. You know, we've seen some real resistance. It was interesting, I was just looking at answers that most of the mayoral candidates gave to a Cranes interview question about member deference. It was talking about ULURP and talking about, the tradition of member deference in the council. All the candidates who responded, save one, said some version of, we are too deferential to the council member. All of them did. That was striking to me. I don't know that we would have heard the same thing 5 or 10 years ago. At the same time, we've seen that we had a deeply divided fight in the city council over City of Yes for housing. And while ultimately a version of it passed, many neighborhoods around the city, many neighborhoods that struggle the most, arguably, with affordability when it comes to housing, couldn't get behind it. So I want to start there. We can go other places, but to ask all of you a little bit more about where are we missing opportunities to build a stronger coalition to achieve what you all are saying, what everybody so far this morning has said is so needed, whether it's 500,000 units or 1 million, we're not there. What's missing there? We can get into lots of other elements of this conversation, but I'd like to start there.
I'm happy to jump in. So I happen to serve on the Charter Revision Commission and have had the privilege of going around the city listening to what folks are saying. And the member deference issue is definitely one that continuously comes up, and attaching someone's viability in that office to whether or not housing gets created has definitely caused the divide. And we have not been equitable about who's building housing all over the city. So the lack of equitability has definitely caused rents to go up because you have less stock in certain neighborhoods. I don't know that I have an answer to the deference issue, but what I have seen, and I do think we need to pay attention to, is the unintended consequences of building fast. I heard Andrew say 5,000 new young people come to the city every day. What I was hearing in those hearings are people who want to keep the identity of their neighborhoods. People who have invested in their neighborhoods in places like Brownsville and places like East New York, And they're like, we do not want to get pushed out. So while member deference is definitely an issue that keeps building from happening, and I remember Borough President Reynoso saying that maybe you need to rise up to the borough president's level, and we need to look at that structure, and it's one that we're definitely considering as a commission. We do have to also keep in mind that there's an identity to these neighborhoods that is important while we still build housing that makes sense in each of those neighborhoods. It's being washed away.
So one of the challenges, right, for call it from the real estate side, development is zoning and tax policy discourage development. It's really that straightforward. The cost to build market rate housing, you basically can't do it because of the tax structure, right? So the only way somebody can build a new market rate house is through some form of tax subsidized development, which includes affordable housing, which then is fraught with its own political risks, right? And so if we really want to build more housing, you actually have to just change zoning policy and change tax policy and allow either for free market to be able to build, because we need it at all levels. The reality is every neighborhood is too expensive today. And so whether it's that upper middle class, young families who are leaving because they make $250,000, which is a lot of money, but it's actually not a lot of money when you have to pay rents that are $120 a square foot, right? So maybe it doesn't get the same sympathy, obviously, but that is an issue of what drives people out, let alone when then you get to, is affordable housing being built in neighborhoods? But I also will say, at some point, tough decisions have to be made, and what is this role of government or the city, but to actually make a decision that sometimes has to be for the good of the city. You actually have to make a decision. Maybe that's not as popular at that moment in a neighborhood. And when we have member deference, when we have any voice can actually stymie development, what we get is a housing crisis that has no end in sight, because we're not making actually tough decisions. We're arguing about process that gets us nowhere. And that's just fact. I know that's a harsh statement, but it's the reality of, I wish there was a better answer. We've got to preserve neighborhoods. We've got to build more housing. That has been, since I've started this project with you guys, I mean, and long before I ever started it, it is like Groundhog Day. All we do is talk about the fact that we have a housing crisis. We're not building enough units.
And I think that the answer is somewhere in the middle, for sure.
Let's build it.
Yeah,
I mean,
the answer is somewhere in the middle.
You have to.
Yeah. And I think the low-hanging fruit is also how bureaucratic the process is, how many
100%.
agencies are involved. And I think for sure there's a lot of work that we can do that to streamline that process as well.
It's cumbersome. I do a lot of work in Las Vegas, and it's interesting. They do not roll over and give you what you want. You're not a four-letter word. They actually work with you to get things done, and they engage the neighborhood, they listen to people, and they actually make decisions so much faster. And that actually, and they have a housing price problem too, so far from perfect. Just saying that New York needs to do a better job of getting these things done, and we're going to have to break some eggs, and people are going to have to be unhappy because the end result will actually be a better New York. It's just that straightforward.
But I do think that taking all of that and also holding a message relayed earlier around doing everything all at once, right, is it's not just affordable housing, right, but if we're building housing, affordable housing, market rate housing, and they're in areas where there aren't childcare and where there isn't transportation, right, we're talking about making a city inaccessible despite there being a physical place to live. So, we want to retain young families, have affordable housing and childcare deserts. They're going to move to an area where there is a childcare availability for them, right? So I think the answer is a lot more complicated than just housing, but all of these things need to be taken into consideration at once.
Well, Kelly, let me follow up with that. I mean, we're talking about some of the challenges just around the availability of childcare. We showed some data in our most recent report that showed that about, in terms of licensed childcare providers, the total numbers decreased about 8% over the past decade in New York City. We looked at some data that showed that about 14% of community districts across the city are effectively childcare deserts today. We know there's a lot of other issues related to our childcare infrastructure, but just when it comes to closing some of those gaps alone, what's the biggest problem there? And if a mayor, and like housing, many of the candidates for mayor right now are also trying to run to be the childcare mayor. Where should they be focusing their efforts if they want to make progress on closing some of those gaps?
Yeah, I think what we really need to acknowledge, and I'm glad someone in the audience brought it up earlier too, is the fact that the childcare workforce here is really the backbone of the society. And childcare is an industry, and yet we're treating them by value of the dollar here as really an appendix to society, if you will. So, to give some stats here, the childcare industry in New York State is on average making less than the median wage. Community organizations, childcare providers, their contracts are not paying for the true cost of care. Those contracts are suffering delayed payments, so it's making it hard for them to actually maintain their doors open. They have to lay off staff. We know as we're thinking about preschool, infant, toddler care, there have to be a lot of adults in the room. So childcare is an expensive industry, right? It's not a one-person show. There are multiple adults that need to be paid to be caring for your children. And the economics just don't add up here. We're not paying the workforce well, but we're asking a lot of dollars from families to pay into it. So where is the mismatch here? And so to give a little bit more color into the workforce to just paint how dire the situation is, 1 in 4 employed childcare workers in New York City are living in poverty. More than half of them themselves qualify for public assistance themselves. Of those current seats that are available, I believe it's somewhere a little over 10,000 licensed providers across the city. 3,800 providers are operating center-based care, but the majority of them, almost double, are home-based providers. That means they're operating businesses outside of their home, inside of their homes. So their home is their business is their home. They're feeling the extra effects of housing instability and of childcare instability when it comes to affordability. So we need to really look at how we can focus to stabilize the workforce. What is the investment that the city needs to make sure that they are earning a thriving wage, not just a living wage, that there's opportunity for mobility, right? We're talking about career growth, but many childcare workers are stuck. There is no engine for mobility in their own career path as well. And also they're stressed, they're overburdened, they're not given the opportunity to access resources. I think someone else mentioned in the audience earlier, they don't have access to benefits, right? Healthcare, access to the normal things that we expect for ourselves as employees, but we're not thinking about the same thing for our childcare workforce, but yet rely on them so heavily. There are some other issues too that I think the city could really focus on is what is the administrative burden, right? How can technology come to help? But what are some of those administrative things that need to be refreshed so that we're not taking away from the quality of care over paperwork that is unnecessary, over regulations that might not reflect what it means to offer quality care for children, but also keeping the workforce. During the pandemic, certainly post-pandemic still, we see a lot of childcares that have to temporarily close because there's a temporary shortage, right? You have one person leave to find a different job because it pays more to be a dog walker in New York City than it does to be a childcare provider, unfortunately. And now those centers need to close because they're out of compliance for, the 2-3 weeks that they're waiting to hire somebody. That's just not good. It's not good for our families to have that consistent childcare instability. I would say, too, that we're currently at a moment where in New York City public schools, they're about to hire a massive sprint of early educators. This is the same talent workforce that our early child care education sector is competing for and can't meet in the same pay parity. So I believe we're probably going to see an even bigger loss of child care providers in the near future. So the city really needs to step up to see how we can support those providers.
Thanks, by the way, I agree with everything you're saying. It's what I do think is important, though, then, is the next question to that, because it is I would say I think early childhood, 0 through 5, is one of the most imperative issues facing this city, especially for the economic vitality and the morality of it. But then it begs the question: it's resources. So what are we not going to do? Because that's I think one of the challenges we have. I mean, Jonathan and I were talking about earlier today. You have to be able to look at, there's probably a 20-year-old program someplace that doesn't make sense anymore because we've got to take that money. We have to. and funnel it into childcare, right? Like, there's no other answer than there needs to, I mean, the Iowa program is a great idea. Private sector will join in that, right? They will if there's a plan. They'll build it if you can build it, right? All of those things. But it really comes down to, since we can't do everything, what are we not going to do and prioritize? Because if we don't prioritize pay, economic development, portable benefits, we're not going to actually solve the problem. And so that's really the next question to me is, what should we cut to really focus on the right thing? That's, I think, a really important discussion.
So I don't disagree, but I also think that if we were to bring in the private sector to be part of the solution, there's some very good models where employers who are coming to New York are saying, we'll give you a voucher for childcare as part of their benefits. And the more we incentivize those types of solutions, we start to lessen the need. I just want to go back to something that you said, because I think it's important to look at the root cause of how we got here. And while we all celebrated pre-K for all, and it was incredible, what we didn't pay attention to, or some of us didn't pay attention to, was the fact that we were taking from the workforce and we left family child care providers with the most expensive kids. And no one solved for that. So that is going to continue to happen. However, if we had a child care program that was universal and worked, I believe there was a study that came out that families would be making more than $32 billion because they know that their kids are well taken care of. There is a continuum of care that goes beyond 0 to 5, and they can stay at work and be productive. So it is a huge boost to the economy to have a child care system that works. I don't think we have to necessarily stop doing something, although I do agree, but we have to be creative about how we do it.
Well, no, I will. If you look at the New York City budget, there has to be something, right? We're getting less federal aid today. We are at the highest tax rate in this country. At some point, something has to change. And so my point was, there has to be something that you could reprioritize, because getting living wages for the child care industry, getting these facilities funded, where that actually is a lot of money. It's a very expensive proposition, and it has one of the greatest economic impacts on the lives of individuals as well as the economy of New York. So it should be a priority. And a priority that gets funded is really not talked about, but funded. So that's really my
Well, I'd love to ask you all a follow-up question on this, and Kirk, bring you in again too. But on a couple points, I think I'm happy to hear thoughts about what we're funding that isn't working, because clearly we have a municipal budget that's going to top $120 billion. And I don't know that we're getting $120 billion worth of results, so I'd love to ask you all about that. But also, Kelly, you brought this up earlier, there are some things that the mayor specifically can do that may involve, maybe there's smaller stakes than solving for childcare wages. And I look at a lot of economic data all day, and it's hard to find a job in New York City that pays less than childcare worker. I mean, we're talking the median childcare worker is making $25,000 a year in New York City. It's hard to imagine. But I mentioned this, Kelly, to say, well, what are some of those things that the mayor could do that could lower the costs of operating a child care facility or home-based care center? And Kirk, asking you mentioned a little bit earlier, I think, a billion-dollar question in housing, which is, are we building the right types of housing? But I ask you this in the context of where we're spending money to say, are we spending too much money subsidizing the wrong things? Should we be making it easier to build more market rate housing, or is that not solving the problem in your view? Or are there things that we're doing where we're putting most of the subsidy that you think maybe we could be spending that money more wisely? So I'm just opening this up a little bit. Let's stay on this thread around kind of making this work fiscally for the city. I'm thinking specifically about the city because it would be easy for the mayor to say, well, look, if the state gives us $15 billion a year, we'll do universal child care and we'd all benefit immensely. But I do want to think about some of those things that doesn't let the mayor off the hook for making some smart decisions, today and tomorrow. So I open this back up to all of you, but what are some of those things?
Do you want to talk about, Kelly, the child care question first?
Sure. I wish I had the solution because that would solve everything. But I will say I think it's not just sort of how can we make it work, but sort of where can we make what the current system is doing better before we think about rolling out the future as well, right? So I think, and agree with Grace, totally celebrate the pre-K rollout, the 3K rollout, and really continuing hearing how we're aging down and rolling it out. But I still think that we're missing the mark here on the fact that there's seats available until 2 p.m., right? What working family then has to cobble up other areas for childcare? And so it's not just universal after school, but again, to those home-based providers. And so, I think the 3K pre-K system right now, I think offers about 120, 130,000 seats. If we made those seats, all of them just by nature extended day seats, we would have full utilization of childcare. I think there are unused seats right now that are costing the city money, and that's what is a lot of the conversations around why there might be chopping block conversations on the budget for 3K and pre-K, because we have evidence of, hey, everyone says they want childcare, but then we have 15,000 seats that go unused. Well, they're unused because they're not useful to me right now. So how can we invest in a full 3K pre-K program? On the same side on the opposite side of that same equation is also, how do we as a city prioritize childcare assistance? I mean, we've made strides over the last couple of years in increasing the eligibility cap for families so that more families can access the assistance, and also increasing the market rate so that childcare providers are getting paid more per subsidy, which has made it a much more viable program. But it's still not enough. And now, as we're seeing, you've seen probably in conversations and in the news, right? There's a funding cliff around it. So we're about to lose families even more so around childcare assistance. So the city really needs to invest in the childcare assistance program to maintain availability of care for families, tens of thousands of families that have been able to access the program.
So with respect to housing expenditure and what we could do differently, so without exception, we have the best infrastructure and personnel in our housing agencies in New York City and at the state, DHS, HPD, HDC, NYCHA, and HCR. And we spend, this used to be true 40, 50 years ago, and I don't know if it's still true, but I still say it, that we spend more money than the next 59 largest cities combined on housing, and like 97% of our homeless, I think, are housed in our city. So those are the things I think we get right. What we get wrong is that there's a missing housing typology to serve people with chronic and serious mental illness. They can't be served in supportive housing. We don't have long stay options for them in the way most state psychiatric hospitals accommodated people in that situation. There's a philosophy that exists among advocates about not involuntarily hospitalizing people, letting them sort of live on the street or wherever they choose to live. First of all, just when people give you stuff, it doesn't mean they care about you. And sometimes they just want to sedate you, or they don't want to be bothered, or they don't care enough. And so the problem we have is people say they care, but they don't really care. And I'll give you a simple example. If any of us had a child who had chronic and serious mental illness, who we know really could not live independently, and they were on the street and you didn't know where they were, and my mother was in the situation with a sibling here in New York City, we wouldn't hesitate to tell whoever we could tell, get them off the street, get them someplace where I know where they are, where I could visit them, where I know they're getting treatment. But when it comes to other people, we're like, oh, if they want to sleep in a subway tunnel, that may be all right. So that's ridiculous, first of all. Secondly, on this point, when you care about somebody, you push them to be the best version of themselves, you hold them accountable, and the reality is, even if you cannot work and you have chronic and serious mental illness or a disability or an addiction, all of which I have in my family and extended family, your job is to be a full participant in your recovery and treatment. That's your job. And the idea that we have a system we spend $4 to $6 billion a year on, where we house people and feed them, require nothing of them, does not mean we care about those people. It's the reverse. It means we don't care about them. And so that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, if you look at our set-asides, on a typical affordable deal, and I spent my life doing this stuff, 15 to 30% set asides on family buildings are formerly homeless. Only 5% municipal employee preference, even though municipal employees are more important than anybody else. How do I know that? Because when they couldn't pick trash up during the Bloomberg administration for a week, our lives were in upheaval. If there's a transit strike for a day, or a main train line that's stopped for 4 hours, our life is in upheaval. So if that's true, why don't we treat them like they're the most important people in the city? Why we only have 5% preference for them? Do we care or not care, or we pretend we care? And so my position is, if we really cared, we'd do a better job of engaging and housing people with chronic and serious mental illness than we do, and we would do a better job for working people who make our lives possible. And I think based on how we spend our money, I don't think we do that. I think we spend a lot of money, but I don't think we spend it in the right way. And then the last point, which what you said, Kelly, about how much we pay people who don't earn who take care of our kids, resonated with me, because people who are providing direct social service to folks who have chronic mental illness aren't paid enough. And so we spend a lot of money enriching landlords and owners of hotels because we're not thoughtful about executing and planning for crisis. And we provide a lower level of service than the people who have chronic and serious mental illness need, and we don't pay the people who serve them enough. That's a problem.
So I want to go back to a question you asked, because I've been thinking about it. And it's like, what can we stop doing, right, in order to pay for some of this? And if you look at the city budget, and I would agree with you on one issue that I'll get to. One of the largest portions of our city budget is how much we pay in litigation for kids with special needs. Instead of right-sizing the system, we'd rather stay in this litigation where we're paying billions of dollars so parents can fight for what they have the right to get, or we pay for private school for kids to get it somewhere else instead of right-sizing the system within the DOE. That is madness. So that's one thing that we could stop doing. To your point of civil servants, we had a massive hiring in the 80s. Part of the reason that we are facing so many crises in payment, in service provider, is because those folks that came in the 80s are retiring. It's their time to retire. We have not had a massive increase of civil servants coming in, and what we're doing instead is paying for a lot of overtime. So that's another thing that we could stop doing if we actually right-size the systems that could pay us on time, take care of our people. So we wanted to make sure that we focus, like, there are things that are waste in government, right, that could pay for some of the things that we're talking about up here.
Those are great. And Kirk, I love those thoughts. I want to maybe ask one more housing-related question, and Grace, we can come back to some of those things, other things the government can do. I figured you would be opposed.
Sure?
Well, let me give you one more, because I think we didn't quite get there in thinking around the cost of housing. And I guess my question for you is, I hear you on sort of some of the biggest needs where we've underinvested. But when I'm thinking about what it would take to actually bring down housing costs, most economists would say it starts with supply. I think there's some questions that come up in the city council from other elected officials and many folks in the community that feel like, no, the problem is just that we're not building enough at 60% AMI or 40% AMI or 20%. And then there's some, I think, other issues around what makes the cost of construction and development in New York so high. So I guess I just want to get a little bit more of your thoughts about, if part of the challenge is that we don't ever see costs come down, how much of that needs to focus on increasing supply, and what's the first thing you would do there? And where else should we be focusing our investments around actually bringing down costs, including potentially regulations that increase the cost for you to build housing today?
I think the regulatory environment in New York is crippling to get anything done. The length of time it takes to entitle a property, to take a entitled property through a plan approval to build, insurance costs. We have a scaffold law in New York that drives up our insurance costs on projects. Earlier today, someone I was with said for every $100 million of costs, it adds $6 million to the cost of the project with respect to construction costs. And then the reporting requirements are withering. We have a whole department that is in place on wage reporting. And the problem is it not only drives up the cost and the time. This is not only a question about cost, it's about time. If you were sleeping on a friend's couch or on a train or in some awful condition, time would matter to you, right? And so it's not only how much it costs us, it's how long it takes us to do things. And the laser focus on design and sustainability is meaningful because in many cities you drive around and you see Section 8 projects and Housing Authority projects and you know them right away. They don't look very nice. So I'm for design and sustainability, but we've sort of migrated to a place where in the affordable world where design and sustainability has become sort of the tail that wags the dog. And it's like the tailor making a bespoke suit in a shop, and he's in there for months, and the suit is done, it's perfect. He comes out of the tailor shop, and there are 5,000 people who don't want a bespoke suit, they just want a blanket. And that's kind of where we've kind of migrated to. So it's a combination of the regulatory environment, our emphasis on design, which my architecture friends are probably rolling their eyes, and you know, a lack of focus on how long it takes everything to happen. That you know, I think are a combination of what the problems are.
Yes.
Well, we can definitely talk more about housing. Winston, if you want to jump in, go for it.
No, I mean, but it's exactly right. Is the process to build the regulatory environment is stifling, and the answer is a political will to change things. To actually, the next mayor, I feel like we hear this a lot, so I have to admit I'm very skeptical because it just feels like promises that never get fulfilled. But the next mayor and the next council legitimately needs to think about streamlining operations, streamlining regulations reporting so that we can spend less money and do it faster for a better outcome. It's a really good goal, but it doesn't happen. And so I look at, take New York, we have too much commercial space in New York today. We just do. If we want to transform that space, knock those buildings down, do something, we actually have to create a framework for that to happen quickly. And if it's cumbersome, if it requires all this reporting, if it's just sometimes it works here, there's a community review there, there's this, frankly, en masse, it won't happen. And there's the economics of it too, that there actually, if there's not going to be profit in it, that's fine, but then make sure the government's paying for it. If it's going to have a private sector involvement, you just have to reflect the realities that private sector requires a different type of return profile. But let's do it quickly, right? Because these things can happen. There's plenty of land available. There's plenty of space that's not being utilized properly right now. I can tell you there's vast swaths of New York where commercial space isn't needed anymore. But that's ripe with housing, but we're not doing it. I do want to answer one. You asked about childcare. One thing we could do is make it easy to build a childcare center that's not on the first or even second floor, right? Like if you own real estate, you can't put childcare on the third, fourth, fifth floor. I want to be careful speaking about safety if you have childcare on the fourth floor, but I would argue that given the crisis we face, there's plenty of places to put a childcare center that maybe is less expensive or allows for owners, developers, operators to take advantage of the space that's not being utilized. And that's just changing it, right? There's ways to get it done if we just go through it with a pragmatic approach. I think what you're talking about is just that. And so I'd love a commitment from the next mayor to have KPI results that we actually hold them accountable to, that says you're going to do this and we can measure that success, because we never do.
Yeah, that's great, Winston and Kirk, and we can get a little bit even deeper into housing. But Grace, let me bring in for a minute, because you mentioned something earlier about you've got a whole swath of New Yorkers who are earning too much to access benefits, some of whom aren't really the flight risk that we started talking about today because they really feel completely trapped. Obviously, that's a painful reality, and that's an area that the Center for Urban Future focuses on a lot. But I actually want to ask you about maybe one step up the income ladder. Those folks that are still captured in your data, that are among the half of all New Yorkers who just can't make ends meet today, but are maybe even a little further up the income ladder. They feel like nobody's thinking about them. You've got two incomes, maybe a couple teachers, or a teacher and a firefighter. They're struggling with housing, they're struggling with childcare. They are absolutely a flight risk because they're hearing from their friends or their relatives, come to North Carolina, come to Texas. What's one thing, whether it's a structural change or a policy idea or an investment, what's one thing that you think the city should be doing to better support and hold on to those families that are still maybe a paycheck away from a disaster, but I think consistently feel like no one's really thinking about that?
No, I think that's exactly right. And one of the things that we've seen is the increase of those families. We've seen an increase of by 86% of visits to our pantries. And most of those folks are working New Yorkers who are exactly in the category that you're talking about. I think that when I think about what we can do, it's taking care of the other things that besides what everybody else has talked about. Housing is going to be always number one. But you also have transportation. Transportation is an issue. Being able to access medicine is an issue. And food is still an issue. So one of the ways that we reduce the amount of money that people spend on food, and it's going to sound like a broken record, is by having a comprehensive after-school system where kids can eat. One of the things that we've tried in our school system, in the schools that we work in, is because, by the way, there's also a huge amount of chronic absenteeism in our schools. The way we're bringing our kids back and also reducing the amount of money that people are spending on food is by giving them food boxes on Fridays, right? That's something that could be absolutely increased and brought up to scale across the city. So that we got so creative during COVID. We really did, and we're missing the mark. A lot of the families that you're talking about also have older adults. Now remember, our study only looks at working New Yorkers. But if you look at that sandwich generation, they're not just having an issue with who takes care of their kids, it's who takes care of their elderly parents, who sometimes are stuck at home. And one of the things that we did during COVID that was brilliant was that we increased our home delivery of food. So when you look at the things that people are going to negotiate first, when they're at the edge, it's medicine and food. And those are two that I think the city could solve.
That's great, Grace. I'm wondering if folks want to weigh in on that. And yeah, gotta go ahead and Megan.
I was just going to say, that's exactly right. And I think, too, going back to one of the points you were leading with, Kirk, is what do we need to infuse in the city to make it so that we're proud to stay here, right? And it's not just, New Yorkers are loyal. I think we've all even said to the point, like, we're willing to stay in the places even if they're not the most ideal places because we're loyal to those places. They mean something to us, the culture, the communities that brought us up. But we want to be proud to live here. And so even if things are a little tight, we're willing to make sacrifices, but the outcome has to be worth it, right? If we're operating in a city where by 3rd and 5th grade, half of the children in the school system aren't reading at grade level. If we're looking at the college education system at our public universities, and the graduation rates are not where they should be, right? We're seeing very low graduation rates across the CUNY system as a whole system. We aren't really infusing the resources that it takes to educate the children and future young adults of the population here. And so, I really do commend bold initiatives from the education system, and something that I would get behind from future candidates or current administration as well is how do we continue to infuse this drive to value the education of our young children from the higher ed down to early education all the way down, right? From the infant toddler care centers all the way into K through 12 as well, right? Things like New York City Read, like New York City Solves, those are really great commitments from the city to say we're going to do something about this. But it needs to start earlier than that, right? Because we want to address these issues from early on. So what are the commitments, not just to availability of care for families, but quality of care, quality of the education that children are receiving, quality of the relationships that families get to have with their child care providers. I mean, that's one of the big things that families look for when selecting childcare, right? You shouldn't be forced to pick childcare just because it's your only option. You should have a choice. You should look at different available centers, home-based providers, language options, curricula, whatever it may be. But as long as we're having a commitment that kids are learning and taking that first step as a city is one that we can really help inspire and keep families here as well.
I would say the other thing to think about is the results are not that great, right? What you're talking about is we're also at a new age, and that is the AI age. And our ability to think about technology that actually can be individualized and customized to the needs of every single child in New York, it's unprecedented. That statement wasn't actually possible, frankly, even a year ago or 2 years ago, definitely. Today, we're actually in a new world order where we should be thinking, I would argue that our results speak for themselves. So I don't know if it's a money issue. I think it's a process issue at this point. But now we have a new tool available to think about how we transform and get to better results. So every child should have a tutor. Every single child in New York now has that. It's in your pocket, it's at the library, it's at school, wherever it is. But with AI, you have a customized learning advocate and teacher that is infinitely patient and can literally customize the learning style to your needs and grow with you. So we have to embrace this kind of technology, which will also, frankly, allow us to get much better results. So I would argue also, it's time to actually think about not fixing not trying to do the same thing, maybe a little bit more, but actually do it completely different with the role of AI.
And I would agree with that. One of the things that we're really proud of is that NYC Read actually started at United Way of New York City. And one of the things that we push for, which is expensive, and that's a whole other argument, is the fact that our teachers themselves have said, we're not ready to meet the moment and create the workforce of the future. So when you talk about AI, and we've experimented with this as well, is how do you start to infuse computer science initiatives into English, into social studies, so that we are creating the workforce of the future. We're talking about all these amazing opportunities and all this talent in New York, and the little dark secret there is that we're importing talent because our kids are not prepared for those jobs. So I think teacher tutoring, right, and teacher support is a huge part of making sure that our families stay here.
We could be the leader in education and technology. And I don't mean educating kids for tech, though that is clearly very important. But New York, nobody has an advantage today or a disadvantage because this is all brand new. So actually embracing it, and look, some people will be upset, right? You're displacing a job. You're not, but I actually think you're creating jobs. But we have the ability with technology to understand, again, the individual learning style and needs of that student, but also marry that as they get older to the skill needs that are actually out there, and it will be able to do training with them in real time, and that's really exciting. I mean, it is brave new world what's happening, but I would love to see New York think about making New York AI and the family of the future, education of the future with this technology. We'd be, game changer.
Kirk, let me ask you one more question that I think you kicked off this thread of the conversation at the very beginning in some ways, talking about why is it that I can't, stay in East Flatbush and have the same quality, for same opportunities for my kids as I would if I left. And education, I think, was embedded in that question. But I actually want to ask you one more question that gets back to housing, which is one of the other keys of strong and stable communities is home ownership. And where we see, and Melva talked about this earlier, we see the middle class dream of even a decade or two ago feeling like it's slipping further and further out of reach. When families are able to buy housing, not only is that housing tends to be more stable, but it contributes to their ability to put down roots in those communities, participating in their school communities, investing locally, advocating for their communities. So I wanted to ask you, do you have an idea if you agree that part of the solution going forward needs to be more pathways to home ownership? I would certainly say when you survey those parents that are leaving the city, they talk about school quality, they talk about housing quality and affordability, but embedded with that is also, we want to buy a house one day. And if we don't think that's ever going to happen in New York City, that's a pressing issue for a family that has no other potential option for building any wealth. So I want to ask you an idea around home ownership. Is there something the city isn't doing or should be doing or could do more?
Yeah, so I have lots. Home ownership is my first love, is the reason I do what I do. My mother's coworker bought a Nehemiah home in the 80s when I was a teenager, and that's why I'm in affordable housing. So two things I think that should be a focus. I'll narrow it to two. First, nationally, the problem of large private equity buying single-family homes and running them as a business line is a challenge to families who are working families and middle-class families, and once there was no more land to do large-scale affordable home ownership, it's sort of like at the city and state level, like we were at a loss. Like, I guess we can't do home ownership anymore. And I've had many conversations about this. A simple thing we can do that doesn't increase supply, but elevates working people. I gave the example at a Community Preservation Corporation thing. I took a Google map and positioned the center as JFK Airport and drew like a semicircle. And those happen to be starting from like Howard Beach, East New York, South Ozone Park, Jamaica, Rosedale, all the way around to Far Rockaway, Hempstead. Those happen to be probably a ring of the most affordable homes. I think the average is like 624 or 624 grand or something like that as of November last year. The most affordable single family homes in the city are probably in that ring. And I said the Port Authority, the airlines, the city and the state should have a program where they do 200 homes a year, or I think I said 100 homes a year. They buy the homes, mark them down by 200 grand and sell them to people at 80% AMI. And somebody I was talking to said, well, 100 homes a year is not a lot. I said, well, in Nehemiah, over a 30-year period, they did an average of 46 homes a year. Do you think that made a difference? And so a fundamental thing is helping working people, municipal employees, live closer to their jobs. That's a simple thing we could do. That example I gave you will cost $20 million a year, which our capital housing budget is like 1.5 to 2 billion a year. Once one government person I spoke to about that who deals with homeownership thought that was boring, and I said, you know who it's not boring to? My first cousin who got to live in the Poconos because she can't afford to live in East Flatbush. And so one, that's a simple thing. People have no imagination and vision and no motivation because people who they love, they've never seen suffer before. I think the second thing is, housing solutions on homeownership should be regional, not like transportation is. And so why can't New York City partner with Hempstead and Mount Vernon and do really large-scale homeownership? If I had to choose between living in the Poconos, Orange County, New York, and Hempstead, I'd probably take Hempstead. There's a lot of land in Hempstead. You could do this. And so my only point is there are many solutions. We just haven't prioritized affordable home ownership in the way we have providing homeless housing because of the right to shelter mandate. And that's a catastrophic economic development, housing, social community development policy. And we need to pursue solutions like that and many others.
Awesome, Kirk. Thank you. Well, we have a couple of minutes for some questions from our audience. I mean, this has gone, I don't know about all of you, but very quickly for me.
I see a few people sleeping out there. So.
Well, let's wake them up, I mean, we have time for really just one or two. Please keep your questions very brief. Keep them cool questions so we can hear more from our amazing panelists. We will hear from all of you, your ideas soon, but I would love to get some questions. Yeah, Francesca, go right here. You'll hold your hand up. Just quickly say your name, and we'll get to at least a couple.
Hi,
Thank you.
I'm Francesca Anselmi. I'm the Director of Program at the Queen's Botanical Garden. And I'm interested in knowing what's your opinion about the role that cultural institutions can play in this scenario, both to provide that excitement that was talked about, like the richness in the cultural life. Cultural institutions do that at generally very accessible prices, so it's very for everybody. But there are also the sites where we have a lot of summer camps, where our teachers train. So what would you recommend to us to be fully participants in this endeavor?
Can I answer this? Because I just wrote an article for our newsletter on this. The two most profound experiences I've had in my housing career was Catherine Dunham, who created everything we know about African American dance, was in East St. Louis when I was there. She was living in East St. Louis in Haiti. And then when I was in Philadelphia, I got a chance to work with Lily A. She created Village of the Arts and Humanities, and I saw what Jose Fuster did in Havana. There's nothing more profound in my career. There's nothing a developer could do to match what I saw Jose Fuster, Lily A., Jose Fuster do outside of Havana, Lily A. in Philadelphia, and what Catherine Dunham did in Haiti and East St. Louis. I just think what the cultural and arts speaks to people in a way we can't in most professions. I think it's by far the most profound thing, and I think our failure to integrate arts education, culture into what we've done in building affordable housing has been by far the biggest failure. And nothing I've done or any of the people in my ecosystem have done in affordable housing approaches the impact that Lily and Catherine Dunham have. Not even close. It just speaks to people in a way like building a building doesn't, and even living in a building.
So I wanted to add, so thank you. I'm from Queens. I love the Queens Botanical Garden. But what I want to say is that one of the things that I think we can all learn from the way the cultural institutions have responded to their ecosystem is how you've incorporated culturally accessible, not culture as in art, but culturally responsive programming for the folks that are coming into your neighborhood. And I've seen the Queens Botanical Garden do that. I've seen the Queens Farm Museum do that, really being responsive to how the neighborhoods are changing and giving a sense of belonging in a neighborhood that creates that real want to stay in it. And I think we need to fund more of that, and more cultural institutions need to do that.
Yeah, I think cultural institutions they're imperative. We're actually having another conversation about how important it is for New York. But I would imagine, when I think of two things, is summer camps and internships, right? Kids need to be busy. Families need a place to put the children, kids, and of all ages, right? Teenagers, honestly, in the summer, keep them busy because they get in trouble. So, because they're kids. So I would love to see that when we talk about this need, that cultural institutions could actually be somehow part of the summer camp programs. I actually think the internship program, workforce development, where you could get kids to help train them, that would also supercharge, where it's structured programs. So there's so much lost opportunity that every single one of, whether it's the Intrepid, whether it's the Botanical Garden, they should be integrated into the internship and summer camp programs en masse.
Great. Well, thank you for the question. I think we have time maybe for one more. I saw some hands up at the back previously. I'll have a question if I don't see them. All right, let me ask one last question then to everyone. I mean, I guess I was really struck by so much of this conversation, focusing.
Yeah.
Oh, we do. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Hey, great.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Elia Cohen. I'm a current Coro Fellow, and I'm actually working at Accenture currently. And there's a lot of conversation around AI and the future of work, and you all talked a lot about AI in terms of education as well. I'm curious how you're all thinking about it as a recent college graduate, seeing the impact of AI in the education space. There's certainly a lot of innovation and excitement, but there's also a lot of loss that is happening in terms of people not actually writing anymore and cheating and doing things, and I think that has really I can only imagine what it would be like to have access to those tools at that young of an age. And then the other piece that I feel like I don't hear a lot of people talk about is like the environmental impacts of AI. I mean, when we're thinking about it, embedding it into every industry, how are we thinking about, the fact that one AI search takes, 10 times the amount of water as one Google search when it comes to, the data processing centers. So I'm just kind of curious how you're thinking about that from those two angles.
So, sorry, I'm on the board of Syracuse, and I've spent a lot of time. The education system doesn't actually know how to handle AI because there's an inherent contradiction that's happening. They'll tell you if you use it, you're cheating. If you talked about critical thinking, it's an incredible skill that is not being nurtured. And at the same time, employers are saying, use it more and more and more, right? And so the education system's at this crossroads where they have to figure out that actually AI is the tutor, AI is prompt engineering. Actually, that is such a critical skill to be teaching, and then they've got to teach kids at all ages how to interpret the results. Because it's actually silly to think that you're not going to use it to help create the outputs. That ship has sailed. But we had to write it and interpret it. Today, you have something writing it for you. So now it's about interpretation and critical thinking, and that is a major pivot for how we teach. Environmentally, I think you have to move to nuclear, frankly, for this coming AI age, and then water is going to ultimately probably end up with desalinization and enhanced recycling.
I think something's deeply wrong with me because even after all these conversations over the last, whatever it's been, decade, every time I hear AI, I still think of Allen Iverson, which is, so I'm like a dinosaur, so I cannot answer that question.
I will just end with, and I think it's not about just assuming that AI is sort of going to replace education. I think particularly from the early childhood lens, right? I don't think that people are excited necessarily to think about how do we put 3- and 4-year-olds in front of computers that then sort of engage with them as the only mechanism for teaching, if at all. I do think we need to continue to focus on what we know about decades and decades of science and how children learn and the impact of relationships and human and social interaction. But what I think something that Grace mentioned too before is, but how can we use AI as an assistive tool, particularly for the educators there, to understand what are the developmental needs of their children? How can I tailor my everyday practice so that my engagements with those children are better for that child and not necessarily going back to, okay, great, now every child has access to a computer that has AI generative technology and all my 3-year-olds will sit in front of it, because that's not the solution. But on the same side, we do need to, confront the fact that we're growing up in a tech age. It's only going to expand more rapidly, and there is a digital divide as we're thinking about working class and higher income families. But so we also need to think about exposure to technology and to AI for our younger generation in smart ways, but in ways so that they're actually prepared to enter the education and future workforce.
AI, so if a kid is going to college and they have a certain level of affluence, they'll hire a tutor to help them write it, and that's not cheating. Yet today, if a kid is using AI, that's cheating. Well, that's ridiculous, honestly, but it is a game changer. Now you have a team of PhDs that can be customized to your needs, whether it's for business development, for artistic development, whatever it is. So the reality of thinking about AI as an absolute transformative force for the working class, it gives access to education, to advisory services, to creation that did not exist for people that didn't have the means. It does actually level the playing field in a way we have never seen. It has to be used correctly, but I would supercharge it into low-income neighborhoods, because you could see kids now creating businesses with AI that they would never have been able to do. It didn't exist.
Wait, so on that optimistic note, I think that is all the time we have for this first panel. So if you all will join me in a round of applause. Thank you guys so much. Thank you both. You keep hearing AI described as a game changer, and you're like, I'm still talking about Iverson, right?
That's what I thought.
Thank you all so much. All right, folks, stay tuned. We are moving right into the final segment of our event today. It is my pleasure to introduce two ideas from two of New York City's mayoral candidates. We will hear first from Assembly Member Zoran Mamdani and then from State Senator Zelnor Myrie. And take it away, Assembly Member Mamdani.
The best way to keep families in New York City is to make it cheaper to raise one here. That's why since the beginning of this campaign, I've championed universal childcare, making a commitment to deliver it to New Yorkers with children as young as 6 weeks to 5 years of age. Here are some staggering statistics that show why this is such an urgent fight. First, more than 80% of families with children under 5 cannot afford childcare in New York City. Second, this also has a major cost to our economy. The lack of universal childcare has cost our city's economy more than $20 billion in the last few years alone. My administration will address this crisis by providing no-cost childcare to families with children as young as 6 weeks up until they're 5 years of age. To do this, we'll open more centers, using city space to open more centers, co-locating within the DOE wherever possible, subsidizing commercial rent, and easing the regulatory burden to make it easier to get permits. We will also make sure that all early childhood educators get paid a living wage, on par with DOE teachers. And we'll ensure that existing childcare providers have the resources they need to stay open, including streamlining the process so childhood centers are fully paid by the city and paid on time. We will also subsidize childcare at home for families who prefer to have a trusted neighbor or relative take care of their child. How will we pay for it? Some estimates put the cost of universal childcare at $6 billion. I've released an actionable plan to raise this revenue and more, $10 billion in new annual city funds, by taxing the most profitable corporations and the wealthiest New Yorkers. We will match New Jersey's top corporate tax rate of 11.5%, and we will tax the wealthiest 1% of New Yorkers, those who make $1 million a year or more, by a flat 2% increase. We will also finally collect the more than $2 billion the city is owed in fines and fees. That's my pitch for how to keep families in New York City. I hope to discuss more. The best way to keep families in New York City is to make it cheaper.
Hi, I'm State Senator Zelnor Myrie, and first let me apologize for not being with you in person. But I'm the proud son of two Costa Rican immigrants who left everything behind to come to New York City for opportunity. They were able to work hard, send me to public schools, and ensure that I was on the path to success. But like most New Yorkers, they did not get off at 2:30 p.m. They needed extra support to help keep me stable. And it is why I was a part of something called the Crown Heights Youth Collective, an after-school program that gave me a lot of opportunity to just be a kid, learn karate, be on the step team, but also reinforce the things that I had learned during the day and make up for anything that I had missed. That is why I am proposing after school for all. I want high-quality, free after-school programming from 3K all the way to 12th grade so that working parents in the city can have some relief and our kids can have a safe place to be. We know that if you are parents in this city, you are twice as likely to lead. And there's so many New Yorkers that are making the decision between taking a job or trying to afford childcare. That shouldn't be the choice. This should be a city where you can raise a family and be a great professional. And it's exactly why I am proposing after school for all and extending pre-K and 3K from 2:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. The only way we're going to do that is together. This is a game-changing idea, and I look forward to implementing it as the next mayor of this city.
We've got just a couple more ideas from the Center for an Urban Future, and then we'd love to hear from all of you as well. So I'm here to share an idea that gets at, I think, the heart of why so many New Yorkers leave due to concerns around education. Now, I spend a lot of time at the playground. Yes, for Cuff research, but mostly because I've got a 5-year-old and a toddler, and I hear a lot of parent chatter when I'm there about a looming fear in the hearts of nearly every parent of an elementary school kid. What to do about middle school? For far too many families, middle school is the breaking point. It's the moment when they start looking for a way out of New York City. And that fear is grounded in the data. Our research shows a pronounced drop-off in public school enrollment after 5th grade, as many families choose to exit the system completely rather than navigate a deeply challenging middle school landscape. And it's not hard to see why. Middle schools in New York City consistently lag behind both elementary and high schools in academic performance. They're less likely than elementary schools to help struggling students catch up, and they post lower student achievement scores on average than the city's high schools do. And parents and students see this. Middle schools receive lower ratings across the board, from academic focus and safety to personal attention and support. Perhaps because of these challenges, families are increasingly looking for alternatives. In a 2023 survey conducted by New York City Public Schools, half of parents said they wanted a middle school option that was outside their current district. That same year, more than a quarter of 5th graders weren't accepted into their preferred school, fueling even more of this frustration. And parents say that public schools, especially middle schools, rank right up there with housing as a key reason why they leave New York. So to change this, the mayor should launch a new campaign to strengthen and reimagine the city's struggling middle school system. This should include making the tough call to close chronically underperforming schools, rethinking how the system is structured, and ensuring that parents have more choices aligned with their children's needs. To do this, the city should transform 50 large middle schools into smaller, more personalized learning communities under a single roof, and create at least 10 new K-8 or K-12 schools to help families avoid a painful school transition altogether. Alongside these changes, the city should reverse the sharp decrease in screened middle schools since before the pandemic, which may be limiting opportunities for high-achieving students to stay connected to the public school system. And New York also needs stronger investment in innovative leadership. A modest city investment could support multi-year challenge grants for middle schools to boost performance, specialize in areas like computing and health, build more academically rigorous programs, invest in wellness, and strengthen peer networks and professional development for our educators. Let's make middle school a reason to stay in New York City, not a reason to leave.
Hi again. I have one last pitch for you all today. New York City has made important progress in early childhood education by launching pre-K and 3K. But even a decade since this effort began, it's still not truly universal. Every year, thousands of families who are eligible for free 3K and pre-K simply don't enroll. That means fewer children starting school ready to learn, and more parents struggling without the care and support they need. One challenge is that supply isn't aligned with demand. In 2024, 10% of families who applied for 3K were offered seats in programs they didn't even request. Another 6%, about 2,500 families, weren't offered a seat at all. In some neighborhoods, programs are overwhelmed. In others, seats go unfilled. And it's not because families don't need care, it's because the city's investments aren't consistently matching where the need is greatest. Another challenge is that the city doesn't know who all the eligible families are. Privacy laws prevent agencies from using birth records to reach parents directly. So outreach remains mostly passive. A website, a flyer, maybe a deadline reminder. It's time to change this by using AI-powered data tools to reach every family and fill every seat. To launch pre-K for all back in 2014, the city built a sophisticated data model using consumer transaction data and case records from 8 city agencies. Analysts merged these data sets, assigned unique household IDs, and built outreach tools that help the city reach families directly. Today, AI-powered systems could supercharge that same approach, automating and enhancing each step. These tools can identify families with eligible children in real time, spot gaps in enrollment, and help target outreach where it's needed most through digital ads, texts, mailers, and trusted community partners. This could mean spotting simple, privacy-safe signals, like families who just stopped buying diapers recently. Those are our future 3K kids. With an investment in the city's own tech capabilities, City leaders could launch a data-driven campaign that helps thousands more families connect to the early education programs they need and allocate resources accordingly. This is how we deliver on the promise of universal 3K and pre-K. New York has led on this before. Now it's time to do it again, using the technology of tomorrow to reach the families of today. Thank you.
All right. Hey, you know what? Can I have another thanks to the great Cuff staff that's come up here and delivered the ideas today? All right, so now we want to hear from you. We're going to ask our audience if you have any ideas. We'd love it if you could share them. We'd ask you to kind of share a single idea for what you think that the city, maybe the next mayor, should do to retain families. Could be anything. We'd like to hear from you. We'd like it to be an idea, and ideally, if you could kind of limit it to 1 minute, that would be great. Yeah, why don't we just kind of bring 2 mics and we'll go one at a time. So if you could just kind of give the mic to somebody, so we can get somebody else going on right after this first person.
Thanks so much. So as I shared, I run One World Project, which is, we're a nonprofit cultural organization, and we also provide early childhood education. But interestingly, we are not eligible for cultural grants through the city, because if you run a UPK program, you cannot apply and you're not eligible for DCLA grants. So that's an easy fix. Similarly, because we're a nonprofit, we are not eligible for small business service funding, and we did an extensive grant application with the Workforce Development Board and received rave reviews to build a career ladder for childcare workers that we were then not eligible for because we're a nonprofit. So while we are motivated by mission, we still employ 50 people and serve hundreds of families. And it makes no sense that we wouldn't be eligible. So easy fixes.
It sounds almost like some of the things I was talking to Andrew Kimball about earlier, where these kind of like roadblocks that we have in the city that maybe they don't make any sense. So thanks, thank you. Okay, yes, and let's get the mic to somebody else. Question in the very back there.
On a similar vibe, in part of my life, I support an initiative in Sunnyside, Queens, that's called the Q Studio Lab. It's a community-based initiative that provides pre-K, 3K for all, but also that extended service after hours, but also an independent school that goes up to middle school, but also community events. So my pitch is to pay attention to community-based initiatives that are generally very holistic and comprehensive, and because they're community-generated, really tailor the needs of the specific community, and see if some ideas from those initiatives can be incorporated in the larger conversation.
Love that. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, thank you. Rosa Chang from Gotham Park again. What I'm realizing through these adventures in public space are that there is just so much red tape, and legislators get so much credit every time they add more red tape. That is going to help us. But nobody ever goes backwards to cut the red tape that's no longer applicable. And then we wonder why everything costs 10 times more, whether it's building a subway station here or doing anything here. How do we go back? And I think City of Yes was actually an effort to do that, to sort of re-examine, okay, this is the framework that we have built for ourselves, and it no longer fits us. Let's re-examine and adjust to make it fit to us today. I think that we need to whole-scale re-examine the framework and cut off the dead pieces that no longer apply so that we can actually move forward with some common sense of speed and cost and have actual impact with the collective power that we all have in New York City.
Yeah, Rose, can you hold the mic for a second? Because I just want to ask you, can you quickly give us one example of that red tape that you're talking about that's just kind of, nonsensical?
Well, I mean, we've referred to it actually a little bit in the conversations here, but let's say, for instance, City of Yes, parking regulations. Right? The requirement for parking to be integrated in buildings. When I know that, for instance, in our community, we have anywhere from 13 to 16% car ownership, and there's a lot of parking on the street as well. It doesn't really apply. And so maybe we should reconsider that.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
And then
just
selfishly for me, I would just sort of say we should look at what plaza contracts are for, nonprofits that
Yes.
for nonprofits that take care of things. It's a little crazy, and I don't know when it was written and why it was written that way. But somebody needs to actually go back and sort of say, we've outgrown this now. That was written for us 70, 80 years ago when we were a different city. How do we actually respond to things where we are today?
I love it. Thank you, Rosa. And we can give the mic, but I just want to respond. Before you go for 1 second, I want to say a couple things about your idea. I think it's a great one, and it reminds me of a couple things. One is I just love the point about we never go back, right? And I think it reminds me, I've always liked this thing, and I'm going to age myself here, but I remember one thing that David Yaski did when he was a council member, and that was many years ago. But he ran the Small Business Committee in New York City, and he actually kind of one year said, let's kind of do an investigation of 10 things that are on the books for small businesses that we no longer need. And the idea was every year the city council was kind of putting a new regulation or something for small businesses, but it never looked backwards and says, what are on the books that we don't need anymore, right? And I think we ought to do that with a lot of things every once in a while. And secondly, I think it's it reminds me of some of the things that Winston was talking about with regard to kind of where we might kind of be able to free up dollars, right? I think his point is generally hey, there's a lot of new priorities we want to be investing in as the city, including universal childcare, but that sometimes we maybe, to free up that money, we ought to look at hey, were there things that we started 20 years ago or 10 years ago that maybe aren't working as well as we wanted to? And maybe there's an opportunity to save dollars with that. So anyway, I appreciate the idea.
One last thought, sorry to hog the mic, but when he was talking about that really, really nice custom suit that you had built that took forever, that suit has actually become a straitjacket to all of us. And so we need to start snipping there.
All right.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alexis Smallwood-Foote.
No. I was just saying for the next one.
Okay. So my first idea is us creating a CLT to save the homes that are in the tax lien sale. So instead of it being in a private trust that we don't know anything about, that was created by Rudy Giuliani, we actually give it to a community land trust like either Edgemere or East New York to collect the money for the city, right? Where we would give the city 20 or 30%, and then we would use the rest of the money to support the community land trusts and the homes on the community land trust, right? Instead of giving it to a secret trust that we do not know nothing about and does not benefit the city and walks off with the city's money that could be reinvested into child education, child care, and housing. And then another idea I have is that the Department of Finance collects a lot of money on parking tickets, and nobody knows where that money is going, right? We need to find out wherever that money is, that needs to be reinvested into housing, child care, and those things, because I have been living in a city for almost 43 years. And when I say I grew up in NYCHA and I grew up into the foster care system of New York City, I had to pull myself up by my bootstraps, right? To make sure that me and my children live in this city. And so what I say is that when you're fighting for this city, you're fighting for people like me and my kids and my husband who works at the MTA and gave you all he had during COVID. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you. Those are great ideas. And before you go, I'm going to read an idea. And first of all, if we have any ideas from our online viewers, please kind of send them in. We will read them. I want to share an idea that was sent to me by actually a former mayoral candidate, Art Chang, who says, my idea is to use public school properties as redevelopment sites with increased FAR, new school, child care, and community facilities at the base, apartments above. All right, that was his idea. Now let's go to yours.
Hi, I'm Erin again. I think that we need to build, incentivize, and maybe subsidize intergenerational third spaces. As churches are declining, we need to, oh my God, saying so many things. As churches decline in other places where people encounter their neighbors of all ages, we need to support the idea that children can be present in maker spaces, maybe pubs, restaurants, other lectures, other public places where children generally aren't, but there's no reason that they can't be there. Maybe not all the time, but they could be. And this exists across the Western world. This exists certainly in the UK, other places. For various reasons, they've set up their public sphere in this way. And there's no reason we can't have it here, and we cannot become South Korea in this regard, where children are regarded as a nuisance in public if we want young families to continue to live here and to feel like they're invested in this place. This strengthens social fabrics, it strengthens communities, and it makes children feel more embedded in their neighborhood and the city. And it also fights some of the issues of an aging society, which New York isn't that yet, but it could happen. We segregate children and parents from the rest of society by default in a lot of ways, and that deeply impedes us knowing one another deeply and being in solidarity for the things we need for New York to thrive. And we can stop.
Thank you very much. And FYI, we are coming out soon with a big report about teens and libraries, thinking about third spaces for our young people. Yes, sir.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm Samuel. I'm a AI consultant, and some of the ideas here are we can implement it, but something that I noticed is a lot of people are moving out of country because of lack of resources and access. So we can have a global family infrastructure where, for instance, we have an AI operating system in everyone's home that collects the data, checks on their well-beings, and then provides them with access to opportunities and resources, right? So everything is all data-driven, everything is AI-driven, and also tech hubs, right? They were talking about extending after-school programs. That makes a lot of sense. Places like China already have AI integrated into the classrooms, right? Why can't the United States? Why can't New York?
Thanks, Samuel. Good idea. Anything else? We got one in the back here. Any other ideas? Raise your hand. If not, this will be the last one.
Hi, my name's Larry Dang. I work at the Robin Hood Foundation.
The what foundation? I'm sorry?
Robin Hood.
Okay.
But I'm speaking in a personal capacity in this moment to say I have a lot of friends who are having their first children, and one thing that deeply comes to mind is plain and simple. Subways and buses could be made more accessible for people carrying children and strollers. And I think that would go a long way. I know so many people who insist that in order to have their first child, they also need to buy their first car in New York City, which only adds to congestion issues and makes it so that there is added affordability complexities when it comes to having your first child. And I think that if we can make our existing transportation infrastructure more accommodating to those families, that people might see themselves as more able to have their first child. It lowers the bar for affordability for your first child. And simply to sort of go off of the third spaces component makes it so that all the spaces that we have, including our general public spaces that we use for transportation, are shared spaces in which children are welcome.
That's a great thought. I mean, you know, we don't talk enough about how, when you're thinking about making the city more affordable, how important transit is. If transit is a lot faster, if it goes to more places, all of a sudden there's many more parts of the city that become kind of affordable and usable. So I appreciate the point.